Get up. Raeghan. Always get back up. My arms trembled, struggling to lift myself back to my feet. Even my legs felt like jelly. And I wasn't sure how much harder I could push myself, even with Wayland's words of encouragement. But my father was watching, and I wanted to prove myself to him. He hardly ever came to watch me train. Always get back up. That was easier said than done. Painfully, I managed to sway myself back to my feet, ignoring the ache of bones and muscles. When I looked proudly in my father's direction, it was to see him walking away. My body slumped, my will to stay standing diminishing. Stand for yourself and those you protect, not those you want to please. Wayland instructed from where he was brushing himself off. He'd won our fight. Again. But I was getting better. I could feel myself getting stronger. Faster. Even if I still had so far to come. I could easily hold my own against wolves my age. They wouldn't let me train with them anymore. The warriors of the pack were my next battle, but they were fully grown wolves, coiled in muscle and strength. I looked back at where my father had stood, feeling my shoulders hunch in more. A growl from Wayland and I looked away. In his training room. He was the only one that my attention should be on. He thinks I should stop, I stated, loud enough that maybe my father would hear before the doors swung shut behind him. Wayland sighed, his gaze following mine. He thinks you're aiming for a dangerous goal. And what do you think? I asked, dropping to the floor, sprawling out and finally allowing myself to pant for breath. I knew well how to hide exhaustion and weakness. But I didn't need to anymore. I could lie here and slowly heal if I wanted. Mum would come find me soon, smothering me until every bruise disappeared before urging me to keep training. Does it matter what I think? Raeghan shook my head. I guess it didn't. It would still be nice to have some that believed in my ability to become an alpha. Those that watch only relax when I fail. When I'm beaten, I can feel them tense when I come close to winning. Everyone's afraid of the new. Your ambition, if achieved, would change a lot in our world. In our culture. Wayland smiled, sitting beside me and passing a cool bottle of water that I gladly took. Don't let others' fears put you off if you feel this is your path. I wasn't sure if it was my path though, or simply the one my mother had placed me on. Then again, she'd never pushed me to become an alpha. She simply wished for me to be trained as any firstborn male would be. It had been me that was determined to challenge myself for more. No female had ever ruled as alpha alone. Not as I wished to. Of course, mates of alphas had led the pack themselves if the alpha had died. But more often than not, another would take over, the beta, or whoever was heir. But Dad wouldn't even name me his heir. Over and over again I'd been told for every strong female there was a stronger male. That, even if I could be alpha, a male would come to challenge me for my place. I could stand as his equal if I took a mate. Lead as equals like Mum and Dad did. But were they really equals if sometimes as alpha? Dad demanded Mum's submission. My nose scrunched and I took a sip of water to get rid of the sour taste in my mouth. My father worried about what fate lay waiting for me if I took what I wanted. He worried that I was painting a target on my back. He hated that the pack watched his daughter with a mix of amusement and wariness. Many thought it was almost cute that I trained so hard when I'd been a pup. My announcement of wanting to become alpha had been met with awes and laughter. Now it was met with disbelief. Wolves would come for me, to try and show me my place was beneath them and not leading a pack. And Dad knew that those challenges could end in my death. Yet I could see the pride in his eyes when I never swayed in my belief. When I got back to my feet even after many broken bones. But he'd walked away today. 100 years ago. People would have laughed at the idea of a female taking beta by herself without a male. I said. More to myself than to Waylon, who nodded anyway. That's true. And now female betas are as common as male. Nodding again. I took a sip of water. Determination once more filling me. I wasn't sure what the future held for me. But I wouldn't stop fighting for this. This was as much my birthright as any damn male's. I think we've trained enough for today. You can go home. Waylon said, patting my shoulder. You fought well. Grinning. I straightened up at his praise. Are you tired? Old wolf. There was growl in his laugh as he smirked. His eyes glowing. Waylon was still one of the strongest males in our pack. In the whole country. We all knew that. Only my father. And maybe my mother. Surpassed him. Off with you. Before I change my mind and I have to carry you home after I win again. He teased. My smile turned into a grimace. I didn't want to go home. Mum would ask how training went as she gave my dad a look like always. She tested him. Daring him to speak his truth. He never did. Not when he thought I was within earshot at least. But I'd heard him and Mum arguing about me. It wasn't so bad when I could escape to my cousin's home, but with Fenna now so far away. Learning to be an alpha female herself with a male by her side. I had nobody who understood. Raeghan I sighed and nodded. Pushing myself achingly to my feet once more. Always get back up. I'm going. Waylon gave me a sympathetic look before nudging me towards the door. Grabbing my hoodie from one of the benches and slipping earbuds in. I switched on some music and began to jog home. Despite it still being summer. It was cold. But the freezing winds only invigorated me. By the time I made it home. My cheeks were bright red and my nose completely numb. I kicked mud off my trainers before stepping inside. The house was full of wolves today and I smiled and greeted those that passed by. The sweet smell of cookies being baked had me pausing by the kitchen. My stomach growled. Reminding me I'd skipped breakfast. Again. Raeghan, is that you? Mum's voice rang through the house and chuckles followed as I attempted to sneak away. A hand on my shoulder put a stop to my escape. Turning slowly. I put on a bright smile for her. She tugged me closer. Pressing her cheek to mine and I closed my eyes as I inhaled her scent. How did it go? She asked. Taking note of my bedraggled state and flushed cheeks. It went well. I replied lightly. Keeping my smile in place, but a mother wolf's eyes weren't so easily fooled. Taking my hand. She pulled me into the kitchen, and I hated that she was going to do this so publicly. Brigid stood beside Ariana as Ben took the cookies out of the oven and I knew the three wolves were listening closely. Your father came to watch you. My mother stated. Golden eyes appraising me. I shifted on the spot. Shoving my hands in my pockets. Yup. He left before I did. My mother hummed and shared a look with Brigid. It made me even more uncomfortable. Her gaze wandered over me again. Her chin lifting as she scented the air. I knew what she was smelling. Beneath the scent of sweat was the first tellings of my heat arriving. My hips had filled out. My breasts tender to touch. And if my mood swings hadn't been enough of a warning. It wouldn't be long now. Her arm wound around my shoulders. Guiding me to take a seat like she did every time I returned from training. She fussed over me. Her fingers grazed over the bruising on my cheek. Studying me with careful eyes. It was my ribs that got the brunt of Waylon's attacks today. Lessons on leaving my body open to attack when defense was just as important. Brigid tossed an ice pack to my mother who wrapped it in a towel before pressing against my cheek. That looks nasty. It's the same color as your eyes. Ben teased. Leaning on the counter. I glared at him. Replacing my mother's hand with my own. I wasn't a pup. I could look after my own injuries. She took a step back. A glint of hurt in her eyes before she turned away. Guilt coiled around my stomach. I should let her look after me. Ariana swiped a cookie off the tray before Ben could scold her, passing it to me with a wink, grinning. I made sure to look Ben in the eye as I took a huge bite. He growled, but it was half-hearted and the tension in the room disappeared. Mum chuckled and shook her head, her fingers brushing over my hair as she passed behind me. I leaned into her touch with a little rumble of apology that made her smile. Taking my irritation with Dad out on her wasn't fair. The throbbing of my ribs was getting harder to ignore. Even with the sweet cookie to distract me, I rubbed my side, cringing as the pain doubled. Okay. Don't touch. You took another beating. The husky voice of Beta Quillen reached my ears and I turned with a smirk. Waylon will have some bruises as well. His lips twitched as he stalked towards me, but I made sure not to lower my gaze. It was a struggle. Quillen had a feral edge that unsettled my fur. When he flashed his fangs at me, I looked away again. Where's Rourke? Mum asked, his expression tensed, his head tilting ever so slightly. It didn't look like he was going to answer at first until he inclined his head. In his office. She nodded, then whispered something to Brigid that I didn't care to hear. Her steps were purposeful as she left and made her way down the hall. I stopped eating, putting what was left of the cookie on the table. I'm going to run the border tomorrow, Quillen said, going to pour himself a glass of water. He placed one in front of me too. Be ready by 6. Not a question. An order. My injuries would mostly heal overnight. My ribs would still be sore. I had no doubt about that. But it was part of my training. I needed to push past the pain. I'll be ready. Sliding off the stool, I went to put the ice pack back in the freezer. I could feel wolves watching me, so I kept my back straight. Shoulders back. Head held high, no matter how much it hurt. Make sure you come down for tea, Ben called after me. I gave a half-hearted wave to show I'd heard. More members of the pack filled the living room, calling out hellos to me as I passed. Sometimes I wished we had a little more privacy. Looking between the stairs and the corridor that lead down to the Alpha's office, I paused. I couldn't hear any shouting. That was a good sign. Maybe they weren't fighting after all. When the office door clicked, I hightailed it up the stairs and into my bedroom. I'd been scolded for eavesdropping at that door more times than I cared to count. Stripping quickly out of sweat-drenched clothes, I breathed a small sigh of relief before I began to inspect today's injuries. I stared at the new and old bruises that covered my skin. This was the price for what I wanted to achieve. I wondered if my father had suffered this much under Waylon's and his father's hands as he trained to be alpha. My jaw clenched as I pressed over my ribs, searching for any sign of breaks. He should have been training me too, teaching me how to lead. Instead, I suffered without him. A knock on the door and the male himself walked in. My father and Alpha inhaled sharply at the mess of my skin, shutting the door gently behind him. I slipped a dressing gown on, tying it tight enough that it hurt. You fought well today, my pup, he complimented, giving me a strained smile. Thank you. He walked around my room, his fingers brushing over the dent on my desk with a small smile. It was from my grand idea of taking the TV off the wall by myself to move it to the opposite side so I could see it better. I'd dropped it, being only a small pup of 4 or 5. That was the first time I could really remember being taught that my father was the alpha. I'd been in so much trouble, forced to eat last at the table that night. A common occurrence these days. I shifted awkwardly on my feet as I watched him, waiting for a scolding or something. Not the look of resignation he gave me. I know you think I don't approve, Raeghan. He spoke up, his voice gentle. It's not that I don't think a female should be alpha. Nor is it that I don't think you're capable. You're more than capable. I looked away. wrapping my arms around myself. I didn't believe him. He'd tried this line with me before, but I didn't care to hear it anymore. I wasn't a pup who needed coddled. Fenna had been my age when she'd left the pack. Yet I wasn't being allowed the freedom to do what I wanted. Dad sighed, making his way towards me. My fingers dug into the soft, fluffy gown I wore. What did he want from me? Why was he here just to tread over the same ground? Please look at me. Raeghan. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to raise my eyes to his. Eyes the same pale green as mine. He brushed damp hair away from my face, frowning at the bruise that was spreading across my cheek. The growl that rumbled from his chest almost made me smile. It proved he cared at least. I didn't walk away because I was disappointed in you or because I think your wants are wrong. Do you know how hard it is to watch Waylon fight you, to hear you in pain, to watch you struggle to even stand? He asked. I softened toward him a little but clung on to my resolve. He wouldn't be standing saying this if I was his son. And not his daughter. If I was born male. He'd be standing beside Waylon, instructing me. He'd be taking me into his office to watch him deal with pack matters so I could learn. You're my female. Raeghan. Watching you get hurt causes me physical pain. I want to tear the one hurting you away. To feel their throat between my teeth. His voice was harsher now. His eyes glowing an eerie green as he pleaded with me to understand. My anger flared. My body puffing up until I was sure he could see the challenge in my gaze. Did your father cower from teaching you how to be alpha? His eyes narrowed dangerously as he growled. The sound tearing through me. Be very careful with what you say next to me. I came here as your father, Ray. But I'm your alpha too. I will show you where your place is. Why must you always fight me? Tears stung my eyes. This was the way it always was between us now. Always so much tension. Fighting. Falling out. He wouldn't train me. He wouldn't watch me train. So I poked and prodded at him until I got the attention from him I craved. Childish, most definitely. But I didn't care. I voiced my anger for him to hear with no apology. Gone was the softness from his face as he straightened to his full height. The air around him fizzled, and it took all my strength not to bare my neck to him. He was giving me a choice to willingly back down or have him make me back down. You think you did well against Waylon today? Let me tell you, Raeghan. You wouldn't last seconds against me. He stated. The power of him a crushing weight in my shoulders. Still I dared to catch his eyes again. Even when he bared his fangs in warning. I was close to crossing the line now. His warning rang through my head again. He would do worse than simply make me eat last if I spat out what was on the tip of my tongue, tipping my head to the side to bare my neck. My gaze flicked to the window. The dominance of him receded. His body relaxing as he got my submission. Much to my surprise. He pressed his cheek to mine, nipping my jaw as if I was still a small pup. Even if you don't believe me, I love you, Raeghan. You and your mother are the most precious things in my life. Everything I do to keep you safe. He promised, kissing the top of my head before he turned to leave. His words left me frozen as I fought between understanding and wishing he would understand. I crumpled against the wall, digging my nails into my palm to stop myself from crying. Only pups cried after being put in their place. I told myself adamantly. Standing tall again. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror by the dressing table. This wasn't the image of a next-in-line alpha. I lifted my head up, pulled back my shoulders and widened my stance. I took one slow, deep inhale, filling my chest, and then shirked off my dressing gown. A relaxing bath with lavender would ease the pain in my muscles. After tea, I'd ask Oria for some herbs to dull the ache of my ribs. At least I would be out of the house most of tomorrow, running the border with Quillen. He wouldn't go easy on me. By the week's end, I'd need to take a day or two off to heal. One way or another, I'd make my father see. I'd force him to accept my choices. He'd name me heir. The air was brisk outside and Quillen's nose scrunched as the wind blew my scent towards him. Maybe you should stay home today. I shook my head, clenching my jaw. I knew I smelt like a fertile female, whose body was telling her she was ready to carry a pup. It would be tempting to unmated males, but Quillen was happily mated to my Aunt Aurea, so it wasn't a pleasant scent to him. Anyway, staying home wasn't an option. My body was flooded with hormones and adrenaline that would leave me writhing on the bed once it started properly. A run would wear off that energy, and I trusted my father's beta and brother, my uncle, to keep me safe from any male that dared come too close. I need to run, I replied firmly, smiling as he nodded slowly. His coal eyes looked me over, pausing at my ribs. They still ached and my skin had turned a lovely black and blue under the sports top I wore. I thought I'd carried myself well, hiding that I was in any pain. But Quillen's eyes were trained to see things like this. I won't go easy on you, he warned, as if a challenge would put me off. Bouncing lightly on the balls of my feet and swinging my arms to get blood flowing. I grinned. Good. We took off at a fast jog at first, winding our way into the forest and towards the steeper area. That was where Quillen decided to pick up the pace, and I grunted in my attempt to keep up. I could feel him smirking even though I couldn't see his face. He loved to test me, push me, because I was stubborn enough to do anything he asked of me simply to prove I could. My eyes picked up every snapped branch or track left in the mud, knowing I'd be questioned about it. Another part of this lesson, to make sure I paid attention to my surroundings. It was hard work as the hill got steeper, mud turning to loose rocks beneath my trainers, but it was worth it when we reached the top. The sky was growing darker as heavy gray rain clouds began to form, but it didn't detract from the beauty of the view. Scattered houses amongst the trees with fields of brown and green heading out towards the city. Passing the village that housed the nearest humans to the pack. I couldn't help but smile, casting my gaze over every inch of a territory that would one day be mine, allowing me to stop and catch my breath. Quillen stepped up beside me, eyeing the sky. Rain wouldn't stop us though, and I didn't mind getting a little wet and muddy. It helped me keep cool at least. What did you see? Shoving my hands in the pockets of my joggy bottoms, I closed my eyes and pictured the trail we'd taken. Tracks left by last night's patrol, running the opposite way around. Something small crossed the path, not long before us. A rabbit maybe. I looked up at Quillen to see him nod before continuing. And deer are nearby. I only got a grunt of approval, but that was more than most got. My back straightened in pride, and I went back to studying the Scottish countryside. The sun was still climbing higher in the sky, brightening the world even hidden by clouds as it was. Most of the pups would be getting ready to catch the bus to school by now. I didn't envy them. Fenna will be returning soon, Quillen said out of the blue, breaking my train of thought. I spun around to face him immediately, wondering why nobody had told me earlier. What? When she'll arrive in a day or two, he replied. We don't get much notice. Not until they've reached a town, so they can call. Blasted pack need to get a lot, least one phone. He shook his head. She's bringing Oren's sister with her too. Freydis is to learn midwifery from Sam and Aurea. A few others will be joining them, I imagine. Freydis has a mate and pup. I nodded, remembering the name. Fenna spoke a lot of the pack when she visited, and her adoration of her nephew. I couldn't remember his name. A visit from Fenna was just what I needed though, and my energy came back quicker than it would have without the news. I can't wait. Grinning, I took the lead this time. I knew the trail like the back of my hand and happily splashed through puddles once the downpour began. Only after a few mistaken steps that left me skidding down the slopes did my ribs really begin to ache. I pressed my hand against the worst spot and my eyes began to water at the pain. Instead of heading further out, Quillen touched my back and urged towards home. You need to ice those ribs. I don't want to see you training until they've healed. I'll be shut in my room for the next few days anyway. I replied, not bothering to argue. He chuckled and slowed our pace to a jog. And then a brisk walk when we left the tree line. You did well. But you missed one of the pack hunting on our way back. Annoyance at myself rose, but Quillen patted my shoulder. You're injured. Raeghan. I wasn't pointing it out to make you feel bad. Just to show off. You're one of the only wolves whose sense of smell is great even in the rain. He smirked then gently shoved my shoulder. Ice pack. Ribs. Now. Clattering into the house. I kicked off my trainers in a splatter of mud and discarded them in the front porch, soaked through and freezing. I scrambled to scrunch my hair into a bun as I made my way eagerly to the kitchen for a bag of frozen peas. I was surprised to find the kitchen empty. At least I thought it was until I heard a cupboard clatter shut and spotted little Jamie feet from the ground. What are you doing? I asked, folding my arms and raising an eyebrow. Bright blue eyes flew to me and I smirked at the expression of a toddler caught with his hand literally in the cookie jar, using the counter to balance on. His nose scrunched and I could see the excuses running through his thoughts. Then he smiled sweetly. Do you want a cookie? Rare I snorted at his quick change of tactic. He knew his audience at least. Making my way over, I carefully plucked him from the shelf and lowered him to the ground, grabbing the biscuit tin. I crouched down and handed him one. Our secret, yes. Yes, he grinned, snatching it from me before quickly scampering off, probably to go annoy his younger sister. Taking a cookie for myself. I held it in my mouth to put the tin back in the cupboard. When I shut the door, it revealed my mother standing in the exact same pose Jamie would have seen me in. My cheeks blushed, despite the fact I was old enough to no longer need to ask before taking a cookie. Jamie had already taught me what to do though, and with a sweet smile, mouth still crammed full of cookie, I offered the tin to my mother. I grinned as she took one then motioned for me to take the tin away. It looks like Quillen wore you out, she noted, looking disapprovingly at the state I was in, covered in splatters of mud. I couldn't blame her really. Not worn out. Just got caught in the rain. He told me Fenna's coming back. Yes. It'll be a busy house for a while again. I tipped my head, wondering just how many wolves Fenna was planning on bringing with her. The house was almost full already with 8 of us living together. There was only one room spare, which meant I had an inkling as to what was going to be asked of me. Fenna and Oren will stay with Maya surely. I took another bite of cookie, watching Mum as she went about making herself a cup of coffee. She looked over, my favorite mug in hand, and I nodded. Coffee would liven me up a bit. Maya only has 2 rooms, and it wouldn't be fair to ask her to house more. Freydis, her mate, and son will take the spare room here. I need to you put your claws away just for a little while, to share with one of the twins coming too. A female about your age. Golden eyes held mine, just daring me to become a territorial pup. I could share my room for a while. I wasn't that bad, was I? And the other twin? She chuckled, adding sugar to her coffee before handing me mine. We'll squeeze him in somewhere. He might end up crashing on the couch, but I doubt he'll mind. They're all used to sleeping outside after all. I hummed at that. Fenna's new pack was different. You only needed to look at her wild mate to know that. What would these new wolves be like? just as blunt and unsettling as Orin. A wave of heat flushed my skin and I leaned against the counter, letting out a slow breath. My heat was catching up with me. But perhaps it was good if it started now. I didn't want to be locked up in my room when Fenna and the others arrived. A cool glass of water was pressed into my hand and I took deep gulps until it no longer felt like I was burning from the inside out. Mum rubbed my back, golden eyes studying me. "Will you stay here this time, or, Mum?" I grumbled, feeling my cheeks heat in embarrassment. Last time, I'd somehow ended up spending my time being tended to by Theo, who was always happy to help a female in heat. Fenna would scold me if she found out. "Yes, I'll stay in my room," she hummed, amusement tilting her lips into a smirk. I rolled my eyes and went to refill my glass, ignoring the sound of her chuckle. It was solely my business how I decided to deal with this. And I was happier to hide in my room till it passed than give some male the wrong idea. Especially when this year, I was determined to stake my claim on the pack and have my father name me heir. I didn't need distracted, and I didn't need someone trying to use me to gain their own title as alpha. Another wave of warm and sweat beaded my skin no matter how hard I fanned myself. "You stink," Ben grimaced from the door, nose scrunching. His blonde hair was tousled as it often was after a day spent in the office with my father. I had to bite my tongue before speaking. "Yes, I'm aware. Thank you. Don't worry. I'm going to my room." Liam, Ben's mate, gave him a look, but I didn't mind. I was aware Ben just loved to tease me as much as he did any other member of the pack. I'd always thought him an odd choice of third in command, especially when his mate Liam was a huge warrior of a male. "I'll bring some food up to you," Mum said, pressing her cheek to mine before urging me on my way. Sticking my tongue out, Ben slid away to let me pass. He grinned, catching a curl to tug in retaliation. I shook my head before begrudgingly taking myself upstairs. At least my room was stocked with DVD box sets and I could take my laptop out if I got bored. I shoved open my bedroom window, then went into the ensuite to open the one in there and turned the fan on too. Anyone who looked up would be able to see me hastily stripping down, but I couldn't care less. The only thing I worried about was my scent being carried on the breeze. But then again, it wouldn't be the first time my father had to beat some sense into males that thought to try and get inside. With everything ready for a couple days spent in lockdown, I flopped onto my bed and grabbed the remote for the TV, happy to watch whatever was left in the DVD player. In a few hours, I'd be too frustrated to even care if it was something I'd seen 100 times before. Already I found that my legs had pressed together without me noticing, trying to relieve a burning ache that nothing would sate. What would I do when I needed to hide away once I'd become alpha? A mate wasn't on my agenda. It would be too difficult to rule with a male at my side. I sighed heavily, cursing such thoughts. At this rate, I'd be lucky if my father didn't boot me from the pack entirely. Things were getting tense. Every time he questioned my ambitions, it was harder not to challenge him. I wouldn't win. Groaning, I rolled over to my front, sprawling out in an attempt to cool down. Another reason I hated going into season, I was left alone with my thoughts and my thoughts just loved to torture me. Fenna would have advice. By the time this was over, she'd be here. The bedroom door creaking open and the smell of food wafting in had me lifting my head. I sat up and wrapped a light blanket around me, smiling, as Mum entered. She shut the door behind her and took a seat beside me on the bed. 2 plates sat on the tray she held and like a pup. I grinned. She grinned back, sitting cross-legged beside me, taking one of the plates. My mouth watered at the sight of fluffy chips and a burger overflowing with salad and cheese. It would be the last meal I'd be able to eat without feeling sick, and my mum knew what my favorite was. even if it wasn't the healthiest meal ever. Thank you, I said, before taking a huge bite out of the burger. You're welcome, my pup. Sitting back against the headboard. She started to eat too, despite her favorite show playing on the TV. I could sense her gaze on the side of my face and felt a lecture coming on. Dad had told her what happened last night. I knew that without asking. Still, she didn't say anything until we were both halfway through our food. Then she cleared her throat and I readied myself for a scolding. But it never came. There's a meeting with the council coming up next week. I think you should come with me. I blinked in surprise, staring at her with my mouth hanging open. She made a disgusted noise and tapped my jaw. My mouth snapped shut so hard my teeth clicked audibly. She'd never once offered to take me with her to watch her work with the council. Like her father before her, she'd taken the country title of peacekeeper, sorting out disputes between packs. Alliances with other creatures that hid from the human world. Offering advice and more I probably didn't know about. Why I think it'll be good for you. It'll be a chance for you to meet and network. Relationships with the council need to remain steady. I hummed, twisting a chip between my fingers. Of course, I wanted to go. But I wanted to know what motive my mother, an alpha female, had to make such an offer. She never did anything without reason. Never. Especially not something like this. Council meetings were for high-ranked wolves only and until I had a true position in the pack. That meant I wasn't really supposed to have an invitation. Does our alpha know you're asking me? I muttered, forcing myself to eat a bit more. She gave me a sharp look. One that had my head ducking down. She hated when I called him that. But in moments like these it was right. Yes. He was my father. But sometimes he was my alpha first. I don't need permission from your father to ask you. We both have seats on the council. But yes. He knows. And no. He's not happy about it. She chuckled, tipping my chin up. He won't try and stop you. Raeghan. I know what you think of him. But it's you that's putting the barriers up. I bit my tongue to stop myself from arguing. He wasn't putting barriers up. But he wasn't exactly backing me up either. So I want to come. I agreed with a tight smile. It would be a chance to show the alphas of the country who I was, which might have been her plan. She smiled and brushed hair away from my cheek before moving the plates to the bedside table so she could tuck me against her side. I wriggled, trying to sit up. A sharp pinch to my ear made me gasp and I rubbed the stinging spot. Shooting mum a glare. Just let me hold my baby for a moment, she said, tightening her arms around me. Let me have this. I grumbled a bit even as I nestled closer, breathing in her scent. I managed to relax and felt myself begin to drift off as her fingers stroked through my hair. A kiss was pressed to the top of my hair and I fell asleep to the sound of her wolf rumbling gently. The peace didn't last though. When I woke around lunchtime the next day, my heat had taken a hold and my body burned. Every inhale filled with the scent of my hormones. Thankfully, Mum or someone else had thought to shut my windows. I fumbled for my remote and flicked the TV back on, praying that I could find distraction in that. It worked for a while, even as the heat pooling between my thighs demanded my attention. Clenching my fists, I tried to breathe through the way my body cramped and burned. My skin was slick with sweat that plastered my hair to my face and had the bedcovers sticking to me. My teeth ground together and I rolled over again, resisting the urge to seek relief. It was so tempting to reach across the bed to grab my phone and text Theo. And at that moment I think the only thing stopping me was I knew I'd face consequences for it, once my heat was over. The teasing from Ben and Liam would be unbearable. And I wouldn't be able to look Fenna in the eye. Curse Mother Nature. I grit out through my teeth. I jumped when there was laughter from my door and looked over just in time to see Sianan, placing a tub of ice cream and a spoon on the floor. She winked before leaving, yelling as she shut the door, "See you in a few days." At least my friend showed she cared even if she had no intention of staying. I was definitely in no mood for company anyway, so I was grateful. Sliding off the bed onto shaky legs, I grabbed the ice cream and clutched it to my chest like a lifeline. Just 2 more days. Soft footsteps padded down the hall, stopping outside my door, and I wondered if it was Mum or Oria come to check on me. Gradually, I peered out from the blanket with a frown when nobody came in. It was pitch black and my alarm clock announced it was nearing 3 in the morning. Why would anyone be up so late? I sat up to get a look at the gap between my door and the floor. The hallway light was on and I could see the shadow of someone standing there. My senses were too skewed by exhaustion for me to tell who it was. I held my breath when I heard the distinct sound of someone sniffing the air, blood rushing past my ears, just as I was about to call out to find out who it was. The shadow moved and the footsteps disappeared downstairs. Part of me wanted to tiptoe to the door to get a whiff of a scent, but I shook my head. I was being paranoid. Someone was just getting up for a glass of water or something. The end of my heat always brought with it a little confusion. With that affirmed in my head, I rolled over and dragged the blanket back over my head. I couldn't get back to sleep though. I felt too fidgety and restless. After having managed to sleep through most of my heat, there would be no more escape for now. With a sigh, I glanced back at the time. In 3 hours, the pups would probably be awake. Kicking the blanket off, I peeled myself from the bed and shuffled my way to my ensuite for a bath. I might as well get up. Being stuck in the same 4 walls was beginning to drive me mad. Hopefully, after a wash, hormones wouldn't lace my scent so strongly. Stepping out of my bedroom, I was hit by a scent I didn't recognize, and nothing of the pack lingered in it, smelling of wildflowers and earth. My nose tilted up to greedily inhale more. A male. I could tell that at least. Perhaps my heat wasn't quite over as I found myself breathing in yet again, fighting the urge to find the owner. If there were strangers in the house, it must have meant Fenna was back. With a shake of my head, I shut my door and headed downstairs. It was still quite early, but I couldn't bear to spend another hour in that room. I'd opened the windows to air it out so it would be nicer to come back to at the end of the day. At least I'd managed to resist the temptation of inviting a male around. When I went to put on my jacket and shoes to go find Fenna, a blur of wild ginger hair stopped me in my tracks. The jacket was torn from my hand and hung back up even as I protested. They arrived late last night with our guests. They probably won't be awake for a while yet. Mum rushed, grabbing my arm before I could think of heading to Maya's. "You can visit her later. Let them sleep and help me make breakfast." Relenting for now, I followed her back into the kitchen, then frowned. If they were indeed back, where was everyone else? "Where is the female I'm meant to be sharing with?" I explained that you weren't feeling great, and I didn't think it best to disturb you. She and her brother slept in the living room. I'll find a spare mattress after breakfast, and you can both make up a space for her in your room. A bonding experience. Making space for another wolf. It was no wonder my mother was an alpha female. She was clever. Sneaky even. She gave me a smile and a wink, then nudged me to get to work making breakfast. Any moment now, I was sure Jamie would appear with Maeve. Normally, the first to wake up, but with guests under our roof, I was sure Mum and Dad had been up long before even I was. Movement from upstairs told me wolves were beginning to stir though, and I chuckled at their timing. Breakfast was almost ready, piling bacon and egg onto a hot tray. The shuffle of footsteps down the hall announced the first was coming in search of food. Turning, I expected to see Jamie but jumped at the sight of a strange male filling the doorway. Big blue eyes were almost hidden by a mop of brown hair that had braids and beads threaded through it. His nostrils flared as he took me in, his gaze trailing ever so slowly up the length of me. Whatever he found in my scent made his eyes narrow slightly. I swallowed and stepped back, my wolf sensing the wild in him. Even though he wasn't as big as most warriors, there was something intimidating about him. Sleek lines of muscle were nearly hidden by the baggy shirt and ragged jeans he wore, and his boots were covered in scuff marks and mud. "Good morning," Mum chirped from beside me, giving the stranger a smile. "Did you sleep well?" The male nodded, shifting on his feet. "I did. Thank you." His voice sent a shudder through me, deep and rough. It grated at my nerves, and I fought not to turn away when he took a step into the kitchen. "Take a seat while you can. I can already hear the others coming. Help yourself to something to drink too." He bowed his head and made his way to the table, and I watched the awkward way he held himself with curiosity. Who was he? The screech of a chair being pulled back jolted me back into reality, and I spun around to finish dishing out food. Quillen and Oria came in next with the pups that were chattering happily until they spotted the stranger sitting at the table. I tried not to smirk as Jamie puffed up his chest, strutting behind his father. The male's lips twitched slightly. Not quite a smile. Having already resigned myself to the fact I might have to have my breakfast leaning against the counter, I snagged some food for myself before taking the tray to the table. Mum took her place just as Dad walked in, and I didn't miss the way the male's head ducked down, shoulders hunching in submission. I frowned at that as I continued to watch. He'd seemed more dominant when he first stepped in. "Nice to have you with us for breakfast again, Raeghan," Dad said. I rolled my eyes, my cheeks flushing. So maybe I normally got up later and most of the time skipped breakfast. Much to his chagrin. "Thanks." As soon as our alpha started eating, I took that as my cue and jumped up onto the island to eat too. Mum cast me a look, but I shrugged. There was no need to point out there wasn't room for me at the table when another 2 wolves piled into the kitchen. I knew who they were straight away. Fenna had once joked that Beta Bjarke was a bear, but now I knew why. Bigger than even Oren. This male was tall and broad, muscles visible and straining beneath the shirt he wore. It made the skinny blonde female next to him look even smaller. "Betas," my father greeted, motioning for them to take a seat. Beta Bjarke's chair creaked under his weight in a way that had me struggling not to laugh. His mate, Freydis, perched awkwardly on hers, shuffling until she was pressed tight to his side. She kept shifting glances at me over her shoulder, and I slid off the counter to move somewhere she could see me. I took note of the way she relaxed, and the look of, not pity, understanding on Oria's face. This female had a reason to hate having wolves at her back, and I could respect that. "Freydis and Bjarke have a pup just a few years younger than you. Maybe you can show him around with Jamie when he wakes up," Oria suggested cheerfully, glancing up at me. I nodded once, knowing she was asking if I'd be alright babysitting. We could all take a walk to Maya's house, and the pups could run off some energy. The male spoke, then, in a flurry of words, and I didn't understand a single one. The huge beta straightened up, shaking his head and grumbling. "English. Ebbe." My gaze flicked back to the male who'd tensed and cast a disgruntled look at the wall before repeating what he'd said in English. "Can I take food through to Gisli? She won't leave the room." Mum was on her feet immediately to sort a plate for him to take to our guest. I watched with interest. She wouldn't leave the room. Was she shy? "I'll get her something to drink too," I murmured, more to myself, pouring what was left of the orange juice into a glass. I startled when Ebbe swiftly took it from my hands and disappeared into the living room without me. There went one chance at an introduction. I got the distinct feeling this male didn't like me. Forgive Ebbe's behavior. He's still getting used to us. Never mind strangers. Beta Bjarke said, offering me a smile. Grabbing my plate. I took the seat Ebbe had vacated. What do you mean, Raeghan? It's none of your. It's all right. The beta interrupted my mum. Ebbe and his sister were found by my pack a few years ago. They only ever knew the wild, and pack life has certain restrictions and rules Ebbe is still getting used to. Along with having to interact with others. I chewed slowly as I mulled over that information. It certainly excused his cold demeanor and his sister's hiding. Why did they come if they both struggled so much? Surely it would have been easier to leave them with their pack. The question was on the tip of my tongue, but Mum's golden eyes caught mine and she gently shook her head. I wouldn't disobey. Especially not in front of our guests. Conversation started up again, but I barely caught a word. Something about the twins coming with me and the pups, which I mumbled some sort of agreement to. There was something niggling in my thoughts. And I couldn't figure out what. Sitting up straight, I breathed in deeply, taking in Ebbe's lingering scent only to realize I recognized it. My eyes narrowed on nothing in particular. Ebbe had been the one I'd heard outside my door last night. That wild meadow scent had been what piqued my interest. A sharp piercing cry and Freydis jumping to her feet beside me nearly had me lurching from my own seat in fright. Bastian was awake and screaming one word over and over again. Mother, Dad chuckled. You think they'll get quieter as they grow up. But then they learn to speak. Something between a choke and scoff flew past my lips, and Mum didn't hesitate in whacking her mate's chest. Quillen muttered some sort of agreement, which then had Oria glaring at him. Malice. Freydis muttered, shaking her head at her laughing mate. Her cheeks went red as if she didn't mean for the rest of us to hear. Only relaxing when she saw it wasn't taken badly. You sit and eat, my love. And your male will fetch our son. He winked as her cheeks went an even deeper shade of red, but she sat back down anyway. These wolves weren't so different from us after all. At least, not this beta pair. The twins they'd taken with them, on the other hand. Well, I didn't want to make any snap judgments, but one seemed to hate the entire world and the other wouldn't come out the living room. I'll go get Jamie and Maib dressed so we can show everyone around, I offered, getting up and putting my plate in the dishwasher. Jamie grinned, bouncing off his chair to grab my hand. And we can go see Fenna, I nodded and smiled, waiting for Maib to climb off her father's lap. At least I wouldn't be left alone with the twins. I'd have these little monsters too. You trust your pup with me? I asked Freydis. She didn't look like she wanted to say yes as her lips pressed into a thin line, but something had her back straightening. I do. The look in her eyes made me chuckle as I turned to usher the pups upstairs to get dressed. I understood the threat that she left unsaid. But nothing would happen to her pup on my watch. As usual. Getting Jamie and Maeve dressed was tiring, but eventually I managed to get them both in shoes without the other taking them off when I turned my back, leading them downstairs. I smiled at the little toddler that clutched Bjarke's leg. Blonde-haired and hazel-eyed. He didn't look anything like his father. And while I could see his mother in his face, I was left curious. Crouching down, I smiled at him. Hello, Bastian. I'm Raeghan. And these two are Maib and Jamie. We have to wait on Ebbe and Gisli, but why don't we wait outside? Big hazel eyes peered up at Bjarke and the beta ruffled his son's hair. Off you go. That was all the encouragement he needed, with Jamie taking the lead. The two males bolted out the door while Maib stayed with her hand in mine. Soulful eyes locked onto Bastian. We won't be too long, I promised Beta Bjarke. He smiled and bowed his head slightly. Thank you. I'll go hurry up the twins for you, squeezing Maib's hand. We stepped outside too. I'd definitely been wrong about Bastian being shy. He happily ran around with wild Jamie, never shying away from little glimpses of Fang. 10 minutes passed with no sign of either twin, and my patience began to wear a bit thin. Mabe stood, unimpressed, beside me too. Her fingers curled into a belt loop on my jeans. Only it was the two wild males rolling around the grass that she found annoying. They're noisy little pests, aren't they? I whispered teasingly to her. She nodded, letting out a soft sigh, ruffling her hair. I sighed too, turning to look back at the house in irritation. But my glare was caught by blue eyes and a jolt went through my senses. Still no sign of his sister. Something like frustration tensed Ebbe's walk. A scowl on his face that made Mabe press closer into my leg. No, Gisley, I asked. She isn't feeling well. He grunted in reply. I smiled and shrugged, leading him down the path so we could head to Maya's. Maybe another time then. He didn't say anything in reply. Finally, feeling brave enough, Mayef ran ahead with the two males, leaving me alone to walk with Ebbe. I could feel him watching me every now and again, but I was doing the same. Despite often meeting wolves from other packs, this felt different. I wanted to see his fur. Sent him in that form because I thought it would tell me more about him. Knowing the awkward silence couldn't drag on forever, I decided to ask. Is your sister afraid of us? She's wary around strangers. Once she's settled a little, she'll feel better, Ebbe explained. I hummed, wondering if I'd found a piece of the puzzle that was these twins. Because you're both submissive, I'm not submissive. He snapped, then turned away from me, muttering, I'm going for a run. Wait. You can't just, but he didn't care. Before I could properly protest, he shifted into his fur and darted into the trees. I stood dumbfounded, mouth still opening and closing. His clothes lay at my feet, and I growled, crouching to snatch them up and shove them under my arm. Maya giggled as her hand slid into mine, and Jamie took up my other side with a cheeky grin. You look funny, Raeghan. I just lost track of our guest. Does he often disappear like that? I asked Bastian. The little pup shrugged, taking Jamie's hand when Mabe turned up her nose at the offer. Mothir says he sometimes needs to be by himself. He always comes back. Sometimes because father and mother brother go after him. Mother brother, I queried with a frown. Bastian's nose scrunched as if he was thinking before he replied. Oren. My mother's brother. Your uncle. I supplied with a smile. Uncle. He repeated with a grin, nodding enthusiastically. I chuckled, but my thoughts were still stuck on what the pup had revealed. So Ebbe sometimes had to be hunted down. I just hoped he didn't run into trouble with the patrols. Glancing at where he'd disappeared, I chewed my lip as I debated whether or not to try and find him. After all, I had the feeling it was my guess that he and his sister were both submissive that had run him off, not that there was anything wrong with being an Omega. Shaking my head, I allowed the little ones to tug me in the direction of Maya's house once more, much to Jamie and Mabe's delight. We didn't have to walk all the way. Coming up the path towards us was Oren and Fenna, and all three pups rushed over to say hello. I grinned when it was my turn, throwing myself into Fenna's arms as she pressed her cheek to mine. Hey, Raeghan, she murmured, squeezing me tight. Hey, I replied, pulling back to nod a greeting to Oren. He smiled, scooping his nephew up into his arms. I wound my arm through Fenna's and kept smiling as we made our way back to the house. The twins aren't with you, Fenna noted. I thought they'd be glad to get out of the house for a while today. Gisley wouldn't leave the living room or something. I haven't even met her yet. And Ebbe, my cheeks heated as I admitted. I lost him. Oren snorted, an eyebrow lifting as he looked at me. You lost him. Should I go find him? I asked nervously, looking down at the clothes I still carried. He's a big boy, Fenna said. If he needs space, it best just to give it to him for now. Pack life can still be overwhelming for him. Can't it, Bastion? The pup nodded. Father gives him times out. I couldn't help but laugh at the idea of the hulking beta sending poor Ebbe out to the woods to cool down. Still, I had an itch to make sure he was all right. He'd come out of the house with such a scowl on his face. It rivaled even Quillen. Ah. You like him, Fenna sang, bumping her hip against mine. I don't know him. I sniffed. He just looked upset. But I'd rather not spend my day running after wild wolves. Oren gave me a sharp look that had my head bowing straight away. My jaw clenched, but it couldn't be helped. Oren was heir to his pack. Dominant and strong. He set my fur on edge. He isn't wild. I didn't mean any offense. I mumbled. Oren smirked, sharing a look with Fenna before announcing. Then you can go find him if he doesn't return by sunset. I gaped and Fenna laughed as she tugged me along with her. Don't worry. He'll come back if he doesn't want to face Bjarki's wrath. But I wasn't so sure. After letting the pups run around a little longer, we all tumbled through the front door and back home. I led Oren and Fenna through to the living room so we could have a proper catch-up, but hesitated by the door. Maybe you should go in first, I suggested, hearing the sound of someone inside. Probably Gisli. And I didn't want to startle her with a new face. Fenna nodded and slid past me to open the door, popping her head inside before opening it properly, so we could enter. The small female inside straightened up when we came in. Wide brown eyes so different from her brother's locked on me. Other than her eyes, she looked like Ebbe's double. Her features were a little softer, but there was no doubt at all that they were twins. Oren ruffled her hair as he passed by to take a seat on the couch. Fenna sat beside him and I took the armchair, curling my legs beneath me. Raeghan. This is Gisli. She's never been to a pack like this before, Fenna introduced. I smiled a welcome at the fidgety female who seemed far more mouse than wolf. It's nice to meet you. A quick smile that was gone as quick as it came, and she seemed far more interested in tracing the flower pattern on her dress than joining in our conversation. So, I began, eager to hear more of Fenna's stories. Where did you go this year? Oren chuckled, moving his arm over the back of the couch. Somewhere I'm not eager to get back to. Fenna laughed and I became even more curious. What place could possibly get the better of Oren? We went to Uganda and the heat was a little too much for some. I snorted, and Oren grimaced. I'm a wolf from the north. I'm built for snow and ice, not scorching heat. Even though I knew Fenna intended to travel the world, it still amazed me. She'd seen and done far more than I could dream. Uganda. I shook my head in awe. I'd never even left the country. What was it like? Did you see lions, elephants? We saw far more than I thought we would. Lions included. We got caught in the middle of some hunting lionesses after the same prey we were. I noticed that they didn't seem too surprised or uncertain of our presence. They've seen wolvers before, I guessed. Other travelers like you. Fenna shook her head, still grinning. Even better. There's a pack of our kind living in a village miles and miles away from any humans. Their territory is probably bigger than many others in the world. I breathed out, shaking my head again. Hunting next to other big predators must be an exhilarating experience. And to be able to run for miles without bumping into any humans was enviable. We always had to be so careful. Even in the countryside. They look a little different than us, she continued. Obviously. They're made for the heat. Their fur is shorter, And their ears are bigger. And they're built a little smaller than us too. Gods, they were fast though. I've never seen wolves run like that. They knew we were there. And what we were. But they kept their distance. Oren thought it best to leave them to it. If they wanted to speak to us, they would have. We saw them a few more times. I think they tracked us for a while. But they never tried to chase us out. I couldn't blame them for wanting to keep to themselves. Packs here weren't so kind when wolvers strayed territory lines without permission. That's incredible. Propping my chin on my hand. I wished I could have been there. I wanted to see all the things Fenna did. Just not as much as I wanted to one day rule the pack. Which meant staying here. She told me more about their travels. The only downfall was they hadn't been able to stay very long before returning to their own pack. I'd never met Oren's parents before, but I felt like I knew them from how often Fenna spoke of them. She admired them. Whereas my brother Gisli's voice was soft. Almost as whisper. And I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He went for a run. He'll be back soon. Oren answered. His gaze cutting to me with clear meaning. If he wasn't, he'd send me after him. I shifted on the chair, as heat rose to my cheeks, but thankfully, Quillen, Oria and Maya decided to come join us. The rest of the couches and chairs were filled and Gisli fell back into that almost trance-like state where she ignored everything around her. I watched for a moment before I was drawn into the conversation. Smiling and laughing along, as more stories were shared. Family catching up with each other. Sunset came and there was still no sign of Ebbe. I watched the sun dip low behind the tree line as I chewed my cheek nervously. Oren was staring a hole right into my face, and I regretted my comment about wild wolves once more. I'll help you look for him, Fenna said, pushing herself up from the couch, but Oren grabbed her arm, shaking his head. I grit my teeth as she sat back down. He wasn't from our pack. What right did he have to order me around anyway? Surely a wolf that grew up in the wilds was capable of finding his way back here. What's going on? Quillen asked, frowning as he looked between us. Oren looked at me expectantly, and I sighed before admitting. Ebbe ran off and I made a distasteful comment, so Oren thinks he can demand I go look for him. Oren's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything about my explanation. Quillen hummed and waved his hand. I agree. I'm sure you're capable of tracking him down. Raeghan. Consider it practice. Perhaps not. Oren taunted. If Ebbe doesn't want to be found, he won't make it easy. That was a challenge I couldn't leave alone. Even if Fenna was trying not to smirk. I was well aware he was playing me, but I didn't care. I'll find him. Don't worry. I stood and marched out of the room with my head held high. How hard could it be? Stripping quickly. I kicked my clothes inside the porch and stared up at the sky. The trees looked like they were on fire as the sky burned a bright orange. I gave myself a shake before jumping off the step, grinning as magic rippled over my skin. Bones shifting swiftly as I morphed into fur. Energy rolled through me, boosting my confidence. And I started to run, heading in the direction I'd last seen Ebbe. It hadn't rained today, so hopefully I'd be able to pick up his scent quickly. I darted off the path and towards the forest, slowing down to scent the ground as I scanned for any sign someone had passed this way. Snapped branches led me north and I kept heading in that direction. I passed the patrol who barked at me, but I didn't have time to greet them and kept up my pace. Half an hour must have passed with me running aimlessly around the territory, and I was beginning to get frustrated. I stopped by a stream to catch my breath and bearings. Night had come quickly, but luckily I could see just as clearly. Closing my eyes, my ears twitched as I listened out for the sound of paws on the ground. Nothing, at least. No more than the hooting of an owl, and the screech of other nocturnal animals. I couldn't go back without him. I'd search all night if I had to out of pure stubbornness. Unless I couldn't find him because he'd headed back. For some reason. I doubted that. I had the feeling Ebbe was just as stubborn as I was. Where are you? If I was a wolf on a new territory, what would I do? Explore, hunt. Would I look for a place to hide? Sticking next to the stream, I trekked along the water's edge with my nose back to the ground. Just as I was about to give up again, I finally caught onto his scent. It was faint. So much so that I'd almost dismissed it, but as I headed towards the hill, it got stronger. Strong enough that my body reacted as it had when I'd first seen him in the kitchen. Curse him for being the first scent I'd caught after my heat. Growling in an annoyance, I realized he'd climbed the steep slopes of the hill, my friend CNN fondly referred to as fucking nope. But it was definitely yes today. Trudging up, I followed Ebbe's winding scent and began to realize that what Oren had said wasn't just a challenge, but the truth. Ebbe was clever, winding round trees, doubling back. Every trick to try and confuse me. He didn't want to be found. Why the hell had he bothered coming here with his packmates if he'd rather run around the woods all day? Heather snagged at my fur. Sharp branches managing to pierce skin, and every other step had me dancing to avoid thorns digging into my paws. I growled in frustration, then stopped and lifted my head to howl in the hopes that Ebbe would be able to hear that I was no longer enjoying his games. Because I knew he'd caught on to the fact I was tracking him. No sane wolf would come around this side of the hill. A bark to my left, and I pounced, landing deep in another thicket. I yelped and clawed my way out, lips pulling back from fangs, growling another warning. I whipped around. He was here, toying with me. My tail twitched, my weight rolling in preparation to jump again. I'd get him. A rustle of branches on my right. The thud of paws, then suddenly my tail was being nipped at. I threw my head round and snapped. But I only caught air and there was no sign of him. I stomped my paws, then pranced to the side, darting towards the flash of fur I'd seen between the trees. He looked genuinely surprised as he picked up speed and he darted out of my way, rolling to the ground to avoid my teeth. Adrenaline began to build up, hackles softening as I went after him. Was I beginning to enjoy this game of hide and seek? My muscles were beginning to burn after hours of searching, climbing up hills. And now this. All with paws still healing from thorns and sticks. Scrambling to his paws, Ebbe pushed my face away, but I was quicker. I jumped again, managing to push him down. At first, his nips and growls were playful, but something darkened in his eyes when I refused to let him back up. I flinched as he gave a proper bite to my shoulder, then struck for his throat, squeezing until my fangs sunk through his fur. He stilled immediately, head tilting up, neck at an awkward angle, as he gave me his belly. Confusion filled me. He offered his submission so easily. Far easier than I'd expected of a wild male from the Norse pack. Releasing him, I was even more surprised when he suddenly shifted back to skin. I did the same, sitting on some moss as I watched the male in front of me. You got me into trouble. His eyebrow kirked up, head tilting to the side. That wasn't my intention. Sure, I snorted, not quite believing him, but when he continued to stare at me like a puzzle, he didn't understand. I sighed. I'm sorry if offended you earlier. You didn't offend me, he said, looking away with a frown. I chewed my lip, as confused by him now as I was this morning. He didn't offer any further explanation for why he'd run off, and I had the feeling it would be better not to pry. Instead, I sat up, devising to confront him on something else. You were outside my door last night, weren't you? I asked, hoping it didn't sound like too much of an accusation. He stiffened, eyes flicking nervously to me. I watched his Adam's apple bob with a harsh swallow and I tutted playfully. Didn't your alpha teach you to respect a female's privacy when she's in heat? He blushed. Actually blushed. Even as his chin jutted out defiantly. Nostrils, flaring. Your alpha female warned me, but it caught me off guard. I've never been in an enclosed space with another female. Like that. He replied honestly. I blinked before remembering he'd only been in a pack for a few years. And that it was probably easier to stay away from females in heat when you lived out in nature. Suddenly, I felt a little bad for teasing him. You caught me off guard in the kitchen too. I did, I pressed. Curious now. He smiled and suddenly he looked a lot less harsh, but he didn't answer. Sitting up properly. He looked down the hill. I don't want to get you into any more trouble. We should get back. My sister will be worried. She's all right. She's speaking to us now. It was meant to comfort him, but my words made him frown before he gave me a jerky nod, shifting back into fur. I led the way back down the hill. The thud of paws behind me let me know. Ebbe was definitely following. Heat made the air thick, and I was panting heavily by the time we got to the bottom of the hill. Heading for the river. I took greedy gulps and watched the gray wolf that loped towards me. He was gentler in the form. His movements more graceful without that awkward gait he had in skin. I was so lost in noting the differences that I didn't realize the weather had taken a turn. A flash of white streaked across the sky, and I stumbled back. Tripping over my own legs only to yelp at the unexpected roll of thunder. Falling onto my back. My tail tucked in embarrassment. I'd tasted a storm in the air and now I'd acted like a terrified pup in front of a stranger. Ebbe chuffed his amusement. Laughter glittering in bright blue eyes. He nosed my leg while I attempted to claw back my dignity. Closing my eyes and cursing the god Tyrannus for his timing. Rain began pelting down and I sighed as I rolled back to my paws. Ebbe's thicker fur was already soaked flat against him. Drops of water rolling down his sides. Now expecting the flashes of lightning. My ears merely flinched a little, in search for the thunder. Counting the seconds to gauge its distance. We would have to be careful while running through the woods. Dad wouldn't be happy that I'd allowed myself to get caught in a storm. Sometimes the river suddenly flooded. And there was always the chance of a tree catching the lightning. Some might say I was being overly cautious, but something about storms had always unsettled me. Where my mother loved to step out and watch it unfold. And I didn't need our guests knowing that. Sensing my nerves. Ebbe bumped his bigger body into mine. I followed him without thought when he started running. Trusting he knew the way home. I took back everything I'd said about him. He wasn't just a wild wolf. He moved like he'd been brought up prowling our territory. Following every marker that led the way as if he knew exactly where each one was. In fact, I nearly forgot that I was ruffled at the idea of following someone rather than leading. When we passed the tree line and I could see the house, I sped up. It wasn't meant to be a challenge. Or another game. But something glinted in Ebbe's eyes and suddenly we were racing across the grass together. Muscles burned and my mouth hung open as I panted quickly. He was faster than he should have been for his size. But I was sure I could count on stamina. Lowering my head, I lengthened my stride. Slowly beginning to take the lead. Ebbe began to lag behind, and I jumped up the steps of the house to hit the porch, puffing up with pride. I turned the sea. Ebbe had given up altogether, and was trotting causally the rest of the way. Irritation flared. He hadn't played along. What wolf would give up like that? He didn't seem to care. Nudging me out of the way so he could step inside the open door. Someone had left it that way for us, and I wondered if trouble waited inside. Stepping in after him, I shifted to skin and grabbed the fluffy dressing gown that hung on the radiator. I shut the door before quickly tugging it on. Cuddling into its warmth. A prickling sensation and I glanced over to see Ebbe standing still stark naked. Watching me. My cheeks flushed despite myself and I forced myself to turn my head. To not look. Do you have dry clothes? I asked, brushing past him without breathing. He followed me into the hallway to one of the cupboards that I opened to grab a towel to toss his way. Yes. I have dry clothes. I'm not completely wild. My whole body stiffened. More blood rising until it felt like my face was on fire. He'd heard me. I should have apologized. But instead I found myself spinning round and slamming the cupboard door shut. You were spying on me. A slight shrug of his shoulder was all he gave me in reply before he unraveled the towel to dry his hair and walked towards the living room. My mouth dropped open at his audacity. Dripping wet and still very naked. He strode down the hallway with confidence. My eyes drifted down with every intention of stealing a peek for myself. Only to be caught off guard at the various silver, pink and white glints of old scars along his back. Everywhere. How had he gotten those? You found him then? I spun around at Fenna's voice, forcing a neutral expression. Yup. We got caught in the storm on the way back. Alpha Rourke figured you would. She linked her arm through mine and walked me towards the stairs. I've convinced Oren that you and I need a girls' night, so he's going to crash at my mum's with Ebbe tonight. That way they both get a bed. They'll share? I asked, trying not to laugh at the image of the two males curled up on Fenna's bed. She shrugged and chuckled. They're not fussy. If we're on a hunt that takes weeks and it gets cold, we all keep together for warmth. It's not odd to them. I nodded absent-mindedly, blinking at the new wildflower smell that filled my bedroom. It took my brain a few seconds as I blinked at Gisli sat on my bed to connect the smell to her scent. Something twisted in my stomach when I realized girls' night included this new female. But when Sianon came out of the ensuite, grinning when she saw me, I shook that feeling off. Gisli deserved to be here too. I found your brother and had him come back, I told her with a smile. He's good at hiding. Hiding keeps us safe. She replied simply, her expression eerily blank. It unsettled my fur and I didn't resist the instinct to calm a fellow wolver. I reached out to brush my fingers against her arm. A simple touch. But she flinched. Her head turned away from me, shoulders hunching. I frowned, but backed away. Raeghan won't harm you, Gisli, Fenna assured her, tapping her finger under the female's chin until her head came up again. Ebbe must trust her if he came back with her. Brown eyes so different from her brother's flicked to me. I could almost hear her debating whether or not to trust me before she gave me a bright smile. I blinked in surprise, wondering just how much this female relied on Ebbe. All it took was his approval for her initial reaction to me to be forgotten. I smiled back anyway. What are we watching? Sianon asked, skipping over to flop on my bed beside Gisli and Fenna. I rolled my eyes and headed for my wardrobe to fish out a shirt and leggings. I don't know, but I have the feeling I'm the one that'll have to sort the TV. Sianon grinned, blue eyes twinkling as she shrugged, shaking my head. I shirked off my dressing gown and hung it on the door. He gave my body a quick inspection, scrunching my nose at the mud that flecked my skin. I'd have a bath later. My fingers skimmed along still tender ribs, but at least my top was loose enough not to press against them. Fenna whistled, drawing my attention back to the females on the bed. They'd seen the bruises. All three stared at me and I offered a shrug at the question in their eyes. Waylon has been pushing me to train harder. Waylon. Or you. Sianon retorted. Disapproval lingered in her features and Fenna had a crease between her brows, turning away from them. I plugged the DVD player in and propped my hands on my hips, scanning the DVDs on offer. I need to train harder, I finally mumbled. Fenna tossed a bit of popcorn at me. You won't be able to train if you break a bone. You deserve a break. Rare. My nose scrunched at the nickname, but I didn't bother arguing. I couldn't afford time off. Nobody would challenge my father for his position as alpha. But I wasn't unaware that males were beginning to circle around me, watching me train so hard, watching me refuse to submit. That was what kept them at bay. Lord of the Rings, it was now that my mood was souring. That always made me feel better. Even if I knew CNN would hum along to the soundtrack the whole time. It was a favorite of Fenna's too. Popping the disc in. I made room for myself on the bed and snatched the bag of Maltesers so I could eat my feelings. Gisli was staring wide-eyed at the TV with her lips parted, and I smiled at how entranced she seemed. Had she ever been in a house before this? Never mind seen a film before, had Ebbe forcing my attention on the screen again. I stopped all thoughts of the strange male that I couldn't get a feel for. Fenna shifted back against the headboard, and I lay beside her, feeling such relief at having her with me again. I rested my head on her shoulder, noting the stiff way she held herself. Her expression was still pinched, and though her eyes were on the TV, I had the feeling she was miles away. I'm glad you're back, I whispered so as not to disturb CNN and Gisli. She blinked as if coming back to herself, then smiled and wrapped an arm around me. It's nice to be back. I miss you when I'm away. You know that, right? I nodded. Of course I knew that. Even if a selfish part of me still felt abandoned every time she left again. But she had her own path to walk on her way to becoming an alpha female. Hell. Maybe I was jealous. Jealous that even though many had scorned and laughed at what she'd wanted to do with her life, to travel the world, she'd still gone and done it. Whereas every time I felt I'd gained an inch in my own life, it turned out I'd been shoved 3 back. You don't seem happy. Frowning, I turned my head away from her. Somehow, I knew she didn't mean that I wasn't happy she was back. I was happy in life though. Wasn't I? I had friends, family, and freedom to decide if I would go to uni, or work, or simply help amongst the pack. I just feel a little stagnant. Why don't you come back with us, she offered. Spend some time traveling. Find yourself. Meet the Norse pack. It's a peaceful life. And you wouldn't have all this pressure. You'd just be another wolf. And there's lots you could learn from them. Dad won't let me go, I replied immediately, and that was just one reason it wouldn't work. I couldn't leave. I thought she would try and find a solution, but Fenna gave me a sad smile and turned back to the TV. Okay. Raeghan. The sky lit up in a flash of electric blue, quickly followed by the rumble of thunder that shook the windows, crackling from the fireplace. And a gust of wind moaned as it blew over the chimney. A break in the lightning brought rain pouring violently down. Clutching the warm mug, I took a sip of hot chocolate. I couldn't sleep, even with 3 females all curled up next to me on the bed. The storm raging outside stopped me from finding any rest. Part of me maybe believed if I forced myself to watch the storm, I'd stop jumping at every flash and rumble. A gentle rap on the living room door, and I knew who it was before my dad came in. I thought I'd find you here. I was only a little embarrassed as I looked over at him. He had his own steaming mug of hot chocolate in his hands, and he sat down on the couch across from the fire so he could see me. There's no room for me in my bed, I tried to excuse. Pale green eyes held mine, lips twitching until I couldn't fight my own laugh. Tucking my feet under the blanket I'd brought with me to the window seat, I sighed. It's really loud tonight. Concern softened Dad's features and he patted the couch. Come here, my pup. Grown females don't cuddle into their dad because they're afraid of a storm. Even if I was more than tempted to do just that, and have him sing until I fell asleep like he used to. I don't remember hearing this rule. he rebuffed, patting the same spot again. I stood with an eye roll, but it was hard not to give myself away with a smile. Falling onto the soft cushions, I nestled into his side and closed my eyes. I felt like a pup again. But I didn't care. This was more than I'd gotten from my alpha in so long without us fighting. Maybe that's why he stayed quiet, watching the fire as he finished his drink. Maybe he was as afraid as I was that we'd ruin this with stupid words. "Thank you for letting Mum take me with her when she goes to council," I murmured. "You're welcome, my pup. Try and get some sleep. The storm will pass soon." I woke to cold feet being pressed against my leg, followed by a high-pitched giggle when I grabbed at the pup trying to snuggle in beside me on the couch. Cuddling Mabe. I smiled as she finally settled. "You fell asleep on the couch," she whispered as if it was something I could get in trouble for. "3 monsters stole my bed," I replied, tickling her stomach. She screeched and wriggled, the top of her head jarring my chin and making my teeth click together. I redoubled my efforts, sitting up with a grin. Maebe kicked out, but I managed to avoid her foot, a gentle rumble of my wolf reminding her to be careful. The grin fell from her face. Her gaze locked onto something behind me before she quickly wriggled free and bolted out the room. I chuckled in amusement and turned to see Ebbe with Oren standing close behind. He was staring at me so intensely that when Oren placed a hand on his shoulder, his whole body jolted as if he'd forgotten where he was. "We're here for breakfast, but nobody is in the kitchen," Oren said, kicking myself free of the blanket. I stood up and righted my jammies. "They're probably in the dining room, now there's so many of us." He nodded and began to head down the hall, only to frown when Ebbe made no move to follow. I lifted my chin a little, holding this gaze, but there was no challenge in his eyes. "Ebbe," Oren snapped, jerking his head towards the door. He took a step back then turned to follow. I heard them being greeted in the dining room before I could make myself move, unable to help but breathe in deeply as I passed where Ebbe had stood. I caught myself at the door, my jaw clenching in annoyance when my skin flushed at the scent. It seemed Mother Nature hadn't quite released me yet. Running up the stairs, I ignored the mess my friends had left my room in and quickly tugged on a pair of joggers and a tank top for training with Waylon. By the time I'd tamed my hair into a ponytail, I worried there would be nothing left of breakfast, now we had so many guests. I pelted my way down the stairs, only just managing to slow down before running head first into the dining room door, giving myself a shake to regain my composure. I pushed my way inside. Conversation carried on as I glanced around for a spare seat. Oren was sat in my chair, Bjarke and Freydis taking the seats across. Begrudgingly, I took the chair beside Gisli, despite my wolf urging me to make her move down one. Thankfully, there was food left and I filled my plate with cold bacon and egg toast, and poured what was left of the orange juice. My mother smiled down the table at me and I returned it, feeling a little better than I had last night. "Why did you sleep downstairs?" Ebbe asked, drawing my attention to him. I shifted on my chair, eyes darting to the others around the table, but everyone was listening intently to whatever Beta Bjarke was saying. "There wasn't enough room for me. I thought my friends and your sister would be comfier and have more room if I crashed on the couch," I answered before taking a much-needed bite of food. Ebbe's eyes narrowed, his expression annoyed and his words snapped. "Why are you lying?" I nearly choked on my food in surprise, and that drew the attention of my family. Mum looked concerned as I fumbled for my drink to dislodge what was stuck in my throat. Fenna raised an eyebrow and I couldn't help but glare slightly in Ebbe's direction. "I'm not lying," I mumbled. Gisli spoke in a sudden flurry of words I didn't understand. Her chin tilted almost defiantly. Ebbe's lips quirked up and he shook his head. replying in the same gruff and harsh language. My teeth began to grind together as I looked between them in frustration. It almost sounded like this shy little female was daring to scold her brother. At least he only found it amusing. Left out of whatever conversation the twins were having now. Despite the sharp glance from Oren that I think warned them to speak English. I forced down the rest of my food, then jumped up. Heading to train with Waylon, Mum called out before I could leave. I nodded. Already bobbing on the spot. Training with Waylon kept me sane and helped keep my fur under control. I needed that release of energy today. I'll be back by lunch. Make sure you are. Tilting my head to bare my neck. I promised that I would. Before I could head to the door, another voice asked, "Can I come?" I could have closed my eyes and growled as Ebbe stood from the table. Especially when I realized he was directing this question at my parents and his beta pair rather than me. A nod from Dad. And Bjarke stood, motioning for us both to step out. I frowned in confusion but headed for the kitchen to fill a water bottle. I could hear the low murmur of voices and strained to hear what was being said. "You just watch. Understand?" A grunt I guessed was in the affirmative. "I mean it, Ebbe. They don't fight like we do at home. Only watch." My nails clicked on the bottle I held as I drummed my fingers, trying to dissect the meaning of that, straightening up as the huge beta stepped into the kitchen. I offered him a tight-lipped smile. Ebbe followed behind him. His lips pinched together as he frowned at the ground. I filled another bottle up for him even though he wouldn't be taking part. It would be a hot day today. "If you need me, I'm not a pup," Ebbe grumbled, cutting off his beta, who let out a low growl. "We should get going. Waylon doesn't accept tardiness," I said quickly, still smiling as if that would ease the tension. Handing Ebbe a bottle, I grabbed his arm and turned him around to follow me. "I'll keep an eye on him." Beta Bjarke chuckled, watching me tow Ebbe down the hall. He mumbled something but I couldn't make out what. As soon as we got outside, Ebbe tugged himself harshly from my grip and lifted himself up. Blue eyes lightened, and I could taste something wild in his scent as his shoulders straightened. I had no time to fight with him because he was in a bad mood. "Keep up," throwing myself into a jog. I let him decide whether or not to follow. After a few seconds, footfalls sounded in tandem with mine. At least he wasn't running away from me this time. I hoped. He stayed slightly behind me and my skin tingled with awareness of him. I spent our silence still pulling apart what I'd seen between him and his guardian. They could have a break from each other, but that left me in charge, and I didn't believe for a second that Ebbe would do a thing I said. He kept me chasing his trail for hours yesterday. Letting out a harsh breath, I focused on my breathing as I followed the path to the hall. Used mostly for training, it sometimes doubled as a place for the pack to gather. Even the humans that lived in the nearby village rented it from us for Seelidage, birthday parties and fundraisers. Of course. They just assumed we were human too. How narrow the world must look through their eyes. Ebbe caught up to run beside me as the hall came into view, avoiding puddles left from last night's storm. Waylon and his son Ruaraid were standing outside with a few other wolves, probably sorting out a rota for today's patrols. They all looked our way when they heard our approach, and a few wolves tensed as they breathed in the scent of the stranger beside me. Even Theo folded his arms across his chest, chin tilting up with a small glimpse of teeth. "This is Ebbe. He came with Fenna. He wants to watch," I introduced, stepping aside to let them greet each other. To my surprise yet again, Ebbe kept his head down and eyes on the ground with absolutely no attempt to see if any of these new wolves were less dominant than him. I'd expected growling and posturing. Not this. I frowned at him, because from what I could sense about him as a wolver, there were few here stronger than him. I began to wonder if when Bjarke had told him only to watch, he meant more than just the training. It's nice to meet you. Ebbe. I'm Waylon. I train our warriors. And this is my son Raeghan. He overlooks our patrols. Finally lifting his head again. Blue eyes swept quickly over Waylon's face before settling ever so carefully just over his shoulder. I didn't miss a single thing. Not the way he stiffened slightly. Not the way he seemed to struggle to keep his gaze respectful. And not the slight lift of his lip to reveal a thong that I knew was a warning to me. It's all right if I watch, he asked. Waylon nodded and started ushering the group of wolves into the hall. Of course. I gave him a smile, but he didn't look my way. Following Waylon in as the others all introduced themselves too. They deemed him no threat. Squeezing Raeghan's arm. I mumbled a hello before heading inside too. An arm came around my shoulder and tugged me against a hard chest. Theo's heather scent filled my senses and I laughed as I shoved him away, but he only pulled me in again. I missed you. Raeghan. You've been missing for the last week. I was preoccupied. I replied. Finally managing to wiggle free of his grip. He hummed. Glancing over at Ebbe, who was being showed to a seat by Waylon. I growled and smacked Theo's chest. Not with him. You fool. Of course not. Grinning. He jerked his head in the direction of the blue mats. Need some help stretching? I shook my head at him, but followed anyway. He didn't ask why I didn't call him like last time so I could spend my heat with him instead of alone. And I was glad of that. Heading to the furthest mat like that would help lessen the knowledge that Ebbe was watching. I began my stretches. Waylon was walking around the room directing wolves, but I'd already guessed that Theo would be my partner today, as he often was. He had goals to climb the hierarchy. And Waylon was grooming him to take his place now that Raeghan had left the warriors to lead the scouts. Is he really just going to sit and watch? Theo asked from next to me. And I lifted my head to see he was watching Ebbe. I shrugged and made sure my ponytail was still in place. He was told by his beta that's as much as he's allowed to do. Watch. Theo looked as confused by that as I was. Normally, when we had guests staying with us, they were eager to show the pack warriors what they could do. From around the country. Even the continent. They came here to learn from Waylon and even my father. Are you ready? I asked. Needing the distraction of a good fight. Theo grinned and nodded. His stance widening. I copied his position. Trying not to lose focus when I felt eyes watching me again. Before I could focus too much on that, Theo lunged forward and I had to spin out of his way. I was grinning too as adrenaline filled my veins and my eyesight sharpened with the help of my wolf. We parried for a while, trading blows that barely hurt as we warmed up. It wasn't until I got a good kick to Theo's ribs that we really threw ourselves into it. He was slower than I was. But he was stronger. I struggled under Theo's weight that no amount of bucking and writhing could dislodge. He chuckled above me, tightening his grip of my wrists that he pinned by my head. I brought my knee up, trying to give myself leverage as I growled in irritation. Theo sighed playfully and waited for me to decide to give in. Then another loud growl came from across the room and had both of us forgetting our fight. My head whipped round just in time to see Ebbe shift to his fur. The metallic taste of anger was in the air and I frowned in confusion. What had I missed? What happened that had Ebbe so quickly losing control? Waylon came away from the two wolves he'd been watching over, muttering for them to stay still and quiet. Ebbe stalked towards me and Theo, his tail high, hackles raised, finally revealing that he was definitely more than a submissive wolf. It wasn't me. Wolven eyes were locked on. I noted. But the male's still pinning me down. Don't! I cried out when it looked like Ebbe was going to pounce. Wriggling, I whispered to Theo. Get off me. Slowly. My friend blinked as if only just realizing he was even still on top of me. Brown eyes flicked over to the still growling wolf then back to me. Something flickered in their depths and I swore Theo smirked before releasing my wrist. He swung his leg over to set me free. Slowly, just like I'd said. Hands in clear view of Ebbe. He got back to his feet. While he didn't submit to Ebbe, he kept his gaze low and non-threatening. Stay back, Theo, Waylon ordered as he walked towards me, rolling over. I got to my knees only to freeze when Waylon held a hand up to me. I stilled again, my breath catching in my throat at the look in my teacher's eyes. Maybe this was a more serious situation than I'd thought. Though I'd come to the conclusion that Ebbe simply struggled with the sight of wolves training. That had to be why he'd been told not to partake. It made sense. He'd been brought up in the wild. Most fights there probably weren't done for fun. More like survival. Ebbe hadn't moved since Theo had gotten up, but his ears were still pinned back. Sharp fangs glinting under the light. He spun around as the doors to the hall burst open and Oren and Bjarke came running in with my father hot on their heels. I blinked in surprise as they immediately took control. Circling around Ebbe so he couldn't get past any of them. Go home, Raeghan, Dad ordered. Nodding at Theo, make sure she gets there. I scoffed, opening my mouth to argue that maybe I could help, but he cast me a dark look and my mouth snapped shut. He was my alpha, and I wouldn't disobey him. Theo went to help me stand, but Ebbe snapped his jaws the moment his fingers touched my arm. Don't touch her, Waylon said, moving around the room with me as I headed for the door. Eyes holding the glowing blues that followed my every move. Pushing open the door. Theo stepped aside to let me out first. I gasped in a lungful of fresh air once I was outside. Slumping against the wall. My hands were trembling as adrenaline wore off. Now there was no heavy scent of anger to spark of wilder instincts. Theo watched me with his arms across his chest, but he didn't rush me to head home. My eyes flew open as sudden bouts of snarling echoed from inside. I startled forward and it was then Theo, pushed against my back to get me walking. What was all that about, he asked. And I could hear that even he had to have been slightly afraid of what we'd witnessed. I think he's like Quillen, I answered carefully. Understanding dawned on him and he nodded, shoving his hands in the pockets of his tracky bottoms. Poor pup. My nose scrunched a little. Ebbe didn't look any younger than me, but I didn't bother trying to defend him. My heart was still hammering in my chest. Stomach twisting with butterflies. He had a lot of explaining to do. I wasn't too surprised when I spotted Mum hurrying down the path. Her pinched features relaxing when she saw me. Fenna was with her, but I didn't get a chance to say anything before Mum was cupping my face in her hands and looking me over for some sort of injury that wasn't there. I didn't push her away because I could feel how unsettled she was. Somehow, they all knew something had gone wrong. Why else would they have all shown up like they were expecting a fight? Did you start something, Theo? Fenna asked. Only a slight hint of teasing in her tone. He puffed himself up and shook his head. Of course not. Raeghan and I were sparring. We didn't see what set him off. Thank you for walking with her, Mum said with a tight smile. We'll get her home. You should go and see if they need any help. Help? I wondered, looking over my shoulder towards the hall that was now hidden by trees. What exactly was happening? Theo squeezed my shoulder, then winked at Fenna and a small flicker of jealousy bloomed. I knew they'd slept together. Goodness. He'd probably slept with a bigger percentage of the pack than he'd admit to even himself. But I'd never cared. It was nice to see you again, Fenna. You should both come down to the pub for a drink soon. Bring your mate Oren. He smiled sweetly at my mother and bowed his head a little. You should come too. Alpha female. Mum's laugh was almost a giggle and I rolled my eyes. Was there anyone he didn't flirt with? Your trouble? Theo, she replied. But I'm sure I'll see you at the pub the next time Fladeus convinces her sister. Oria and I to join her for drinks. He bowed his head before leaving. And I was guided back to the house between the two females like I couldn't walk myself. Back at the house. My mother wouldn't stop fussing around me. She looked troubled by something but wouldn't tell me what as she fed me. Redid my hair. Made sure I had water and wasn't injured yet again despite me telling her I was fine. Only once I'd let her check over every inch of me again did she finally give me a little space. I hovered by the window in the living room, searching for any sign of Dad and the others, bringing Ebbe back, but an hour had passed with nothing. Gisli had shut herself in my room, and I couldn't blame her really. She was upset about her brother. Fenna had tried to speak to her, but she didn't want to talk. Still, nobody would tell me exactly what happened. What went wrong? Sighing in frustration, I rested my head against the wall before looking over at Fenna. How did they know to come? Gisli told us. She replied, after a sip of the tea. Mum had brought for us. Mine was sat abandoned on the fireplace. I couldn't stomach another drink. My eyes flicked up as if I could see through the roof to where Gisli was probably sat on my bed watching TV. I don't understand. How would she know? Fenna shrugged and looked up too. It's a twin thing, I guess. They've got this eerie ability to almost sense the feelings of the other. We didn't notice it at first, but a few odd instances brought it to light. Gisli injured herself and somehow Ebbe felt the pain too. He knew she was upset somewhere and led us to her. Signy said she's heard of it before with some twins. It said Hati and Skull could do the same. I didn't know much about who Hati and Skull were, but I nodded anyway. This explanation was the only one that made any real sense, no matter how odd it was. These twins were more than just close then. I'd seen enough of their relationship to understand it was something more. If they could sense each other, it explained their protectiveness over the other. But what had Gisli sensed exactly that Ebbe had lost control and shifted? Could she feel his emotions almost like a mate bond allowed? Did she know what set him off? Either way, it was creepy. And it still didn't tell me why. Remember to start looking out clothes to pack, Mum said from the door. I blinked, then frowned in confusion as she chuckled. The council meeting. Remember. You still want to come? Right, yeah. I remember. I'll do that tonight. I smiled and she nodded before spinning out of the room again. Ever rushed off her feet. Alpha Rourke is letting you go with her? Fenna asked curiously. I nodded. I think she wants me to see how it all works. And to meet the other alphas. Maybe she's hoping I'll charm them into backing my claim. You charm? Picking up the nearest cushion. I chucked it at her, but she easily batted it away with a laugh. You don't need to charm them, Raeghan. You need to show them you're as strong and capable as any male heir. She was right there. And it made me wonder exactly what my alpha female's reasoning was for deciding to take me now. Whatever they were. I could bet that she hadn't told Dad. The creak of the front door opening finally announced the arrival of the others and the others. I sprung up from the window seat and darted for the door, frowning when there was no sign of Ebbe. Beta Bjarke and Dad went into the kitchen, while Oren passed me into the living room. And I paused before following my alpha. Where's Ebbe? Is he all right? What happened? I asked, looking between the two males. He's mostly unharmed. The beta chuckled and even Dad laughed. I bristled because I couldn't see anything at all funny about what happened. I underestimated his speed, Dad added before taking stock of my scowl and sobering up. He's downstairs calming down. My frown deepened as I looked at my feet. There was a basement below that held a few cells in case the pack had to deal with wolves causing trouble, but I'd never known them to be used. Misbehaving wolves normally ended up having their punishment outside on the post. So why was Ebbe being locked up? I swallowed before looking up again, feeling uneasy. Is he dangerous? We would never let him hurt anyone. But this is why I warned him to just watch. Beta Bjarke answered carefully. He is more a danger to himself. And whoever tries to put him in a cage, I snapped back. Dad straightened up and I could read the warning in his eyes. I know it seems unfair to keep him locked up, but when he calms down, he'll understand. He needs somewhere private where we can keep an eye on him. That's all. I nodded stiffly. Slumping. Okay. Sorry. Dad smiled and touched my arm with a shake of his head. You don't have to be sorry. You're concerned for a fellow wolf. I've raised you well. Only my father and Alpha could turn a compliment for me into one for himself as well. I couldn't help but laugh, forgetting all about the questions I still had. Turning on my heel, Dad's laughter followed me out and I heard him mutter something to Bjarke that had him laughing too. I was left once more trying to figure out the joke. Making my way back into the living room, I broke up a heated kissing session between Fenna and Oren, straddling his lap. His hands were beneath her top and they were both oblivious to my presence. Planting my hands on my hips, I coughed for their attention. Oren growled but pulled away and Fenna blushed as she sat up, pulling her top back down. I rolled my eyes. Shall I give you both some privacy? Yes, Oren said at the same time, as Fenna said, no. She glared at her mate and whacked his arm, but he didn't look at all sorry. My nose scrunched at the sweet scent in the air and once more I spun out of the room. Go enjoy yourselves. Fenna, I'll be all right. She laughed, but the sound quickly turned to a slight sound of enjoyment and I cringed before quickly escaping the house. It was still early in the day, and I needed to burn off some more energy. There was bound to still be wolves at the hall training who'd be willing to spar with me. That would take my mind off whatever Mum was planning behind Dad's back. And why Ebbe had been locked up in a basement that flooded every winter. Marching with determination, I entered the hall, only to stop short. Blood splattered across one of the mats that had been dragged out of the way to be cleaned. I walked over and scented it to see if I could tell who it was from, but the strong iron scent overpowered everything else. Could it be Ebbe's? The room was empty too. So I forced myself away from the blood and went to the cupboard to drag out a punching bag. For hours I worked out, taking out all my frustration on the bag in front of me. Waylon eventually reappeared too, saying nothing of earlier events. He sparred with me for a while before he went home for the day, leaving me to vent the rest of pent-up emotions. Only when I was sure I'd sleep well tonight did I finally leave too, bruised and battered. Every step was a struggle. I'd overdone it. Way overdone it. Waylon would have told me off if he'd known I'd stayed long after he'd left. I'd pushed my body further than I ever had, but underneath the ache, it felt so good. But I couldn't show up looking like this. I needed some time to recover so I could fake being alright for my family. My gaze fell to the basement door as I approached the house. Was Ebbe still down there? Surely not. He'd had hours to calm down. Either way, the basement would be a good place to hide out for a while. Thankfully, the door was unlocked and creaked as I pulled it open. The lights were still on too, and I was surprised that when I inhaled, Ebbe's scent was so strong. He was still here. Slowly, I made my way down the steps. One hand braced on the wall to help keep me steady. What are you doing here? Raeghan, I jumped at the voice that came from the far end of the room despite knowing he was there. Walking over, I took the chair that was opposite the last barred cell. I'm surprised you could tell it was me so quickly. Sitting languidly on the rickety cot, I could barely make Ebbe out because of the setting sun that glared in from the window above him. I heard him breathe in deeply and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees so I could see him. I could smell you as soon as you opened the door, he said, frowning as his head quirked to one side. You're injured. I'm fine, I replied, sitting straighter and rubbing my bruised knuckles. I was worried about you after you know? He scoffed. Worried about me or scared of me, I flinched at the venom in his tone. Caught off guard by the sudden mood swing of concern to accusatory. Slumping back in my seat, I thought about what had happened. Had he frightened me? Yes. A little. But he didn't scare me. I'd been around Quillen all my life. I understood that sometimes control was easily lost. And Quillen had never once harmed anyone. No. There was no fear. He just confounded me at every turn, which was probably more unsettling. Head hanging low. There was no trace of the powerful wolf who'd postured to alphas and betas in the hall. I didn't like to see him like that. And I didn't understand it. What was he struggling with? Why did he act so different in his skin? Maybe we both needed cheering up. You know. I drawled. If you'd attacked me, I would have won. I smirked. And much to my surprise, Ebbe laughed. The first proper laugh I'd heard. Bouncing around the room. His eyes twinkled as he studied me. It took my beta. Your father. The head of your pack's warriors. And Orin, to get me here. He stood and stalked over to the bars, and for some reason my heart skipped a beat as he curled a hand round one and pressed in close. His voice dropped low. A rough growl that had the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Do you really think you'd win? Princess, my fingers gripped the edge of the chair, and while my jaw clenched in irritation, something else flickered too. He was teasing me. I realized. Perhaps to him it must look like I live a somewhat spoiled existence, living in a house with things like TV and phones. Food, whenever we want to eat of all different kinds. Instead of taking the bait, I decided to sate my curiosity. And just why did it take 4 males to bring you down? And why were you left down here? You have a loose grip on your fur. The smirk disappeared, replaced by his usual scowl. I swore I heard the bar he held creak as his hand clenched, knuckles turning white. He turned away from me and shoved his hands in the pockets of the oversized hoodie he wore. I sighed, assuming I'd offended him yet again. Then he spun back around. Do you really want to know? He asked, piercing blue eyes boring into mine. I nodded, staying quiet as if I was afraid my words would break the spell that suddenly had Ebbe talking. He grumbled something, like a rough bark. It wasn't the language of the Norse pack. It barely sounded like real words. Watching Ebbe wrestle with himself tugged at my heart. He paced the floor. What little room he had. And his eyes gave away that he was organizing his thoughts. Wherever he wanted to begin was all right with me. After a few more minutes, he settled a little, the awkwardness to his gait easing. Before Gisli and I found a male named Valdis, the leader of the wolves we and Fridas ran with. Neither of us had spent time in our skin, not since we were young pups. Thudlers, you'd say. His casual words were a shock to my system. Like someone had just doused me in icy water. He could not be telling the truth, years without shifting. We were always warned about the dangers of spending too much time in our fur. Horror stories as warnings. Now I'd seen firsthand the consequences. And if he was to be believed, it wasn't the lack of control that held my attention now. It was the fact he and his sister had any control at all. I'd told Theo he was like Quillen. But I was beginning to think this male was even more lost than my uncle had been. What about your parents? I whispered. He shrugged, perching back on the bed. Dead, I assume. One day they didn't come back to the den. If it weren't for the way he tensed up and refused to look away from the wall, I'd think he wasn't bothered at all by that fact. That he didn't grieve over his parents' death. I couldn't fathom losing my parents. Never mind living out with a pack. And as a pup. I'm sorry. I can't imagine what you and your sister went through. Fenna told me a little about Frides and Valdis. I didn't realize you were with him too. I admitted. I'd been such a fool to him as well. Though a small part of me said that he'd still deserved it. It's all right. I watched him for a moment. The way he fiddled with the edges of his sleeves. The silence felt empty. Strained. So you joined Oren's pack. They took you in like they did for Freydis. Freydis convinced Alpha Jakon to give us a chance. I just wanted to protect my sister. I didn't trust the pack. Even though Freydis had been the one to make sure we got to eat when we were with Valdis. But Gisli wanted to stay. He explained with resignation. I narrowed my eyes. Watching every twitch and breath he took. I would figure this male out. I figured everyone out. And you. You wanted to leave finally. His gaze met mine again, and I knew what he'd say would be his closest truth. His voice was firm. Almost a growl as his eyes flashed a golden brown. I stay with Gisli. Not quite an answer, but it gave away more than he probably thought. I felt victorious having figured out a small piece of the puzzle. Though it left me with more questions too. For instance, there was no way Gisli had wanted to leave her new pack to travel to mine. But if her brother had wanted to, would she have been persuaded? He'd given up the real wild for her. Why did you want to come here? His nose scrunched and he leaned back against the wall. His head tilted towards the window. I needed time away from my pack. And I thought I might find something here. I think you're running from something. It slipped out. But I was sure I'd hit my mark as Ebbe's jaw clenched. Why do you do that? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Do what? Ask and state things you know will anger someone. I flinched. Feeling a wedge of hurt hit my chest. I don't meant to. I just want to. I don't know. You're a guest. You're meant to get to know your guests. I know what you want. Raeghan. He muttered. Something like pity in his expression now. You're obsessed with needing to know everyone's intentions. Everyone's standing in the pack. You have an uncontrollable need to prove yourself so you know where you stand. To the point that when something doesn't fit into one of your boxes, you can't handle it. It's a threat. I growled and shoved myself to my feet, then marched over to the bars. Ebbe stood too. Coming much closer than I was comfortable with, but I refused to move. His breath fanned over my cheek. Blue eyes blazing bright and I could see the reflection of glowing green. My own wolf was out. Daring him to keep talking. I don't think you're a threat. How could you be? I sneered. I have to worry about everyone's intentions because there's many who would love to see me fall. Just because you have no interest in pack life and think my troubles are beneath what you face, doesn't mean I'm some spoiled princess. You've been here 2 days, you don't know me. You don't know who I am. What I want. Or how I think. How dare you? I hissed before turning on my heel and marching right back up the stairs. Ignoring the shudder that went up my spine when I heard him breath in my scent again. The basement door slammed shut behind me and my hands fisted by my sides as I breathed heavily. My heart pounded in my chest and my wolf was pacing. Growling. Demanding I put Ebbe in his place. Forget him. Maybe I was too old to go stomping into the house, but when I spotted Fenna, Oren and their pack's betas, I couldn't help but growl at them. I hope he's bloody left down there. My announcement was met by a snort from Oren and outright laughter from Bjarke and Fenna. More irritated by their reaction, I continued on my war path. Only to be stopped by Mum at the stairs. She wound her arm around my shoulder. Not quite hiding her smile. You need to pack for our trip. I'll help. And perhaps you can tell me why you've condemned poor Ebbe after only 15 minutes down there with him. She suggested. Even though her eyes were filled with knowing. The breath left my lungs and my eyes rolled up in dismay. I'd forgotten all about the cameras that Ben, Dad's third, had set up in the basement last year. Cameras with a direct video link to his laptop. How much had they seen and heard? My cheeks burned red and I felt silly as I mumbled. Do you think I act like a princess? She chuckled and patted my arm. I think your father might have thought that about me when we first met. How comforting. He thinks he's better than me. I'm sure he doesn't. She replied, patting my hand. Stepping into my bedroom. I cringed at the sight of Gisli standing in the middle of the room, her hands twisted together in front of her. Wide brown eyes filled with worry. Mum smiled warmly at her. Fenna is downstairs. And I believe your brother is a little upset. Why don't you ask her to take you to see him? She nodded, bowing her head and making her way to the door. Her eyes flicked to me. And I grinned when she offered me a proper smile. Her mumbled thanks confused me, but I bobbed my head anyway, watching her dart for the stairs. What did she have to thank me for, poor pup? Mum murmured before going to get a suitcase from my cupboard. She reminds me a lot of Oria. I smiled. And look at Auntie Oria now. Maybe Gisli will find her confidence too. Considering how cocky her brother is. It's a wonder she's shy at all. At the raised eyebrow I got from Mum, I turned back to my clothes. I really didn't want to go over what she and Dad must have heard. I was embarrassed enough already. Now was the time to focus on getting ready for my first ever council meeting. If I made a good impression, I might be able to push forth and stop feeling so stuck. I made a face as Mum and Dad said goodbye to each other, kissing, as if their lives depended on it. It wasn't like we'd be away for long. Just over the weekend. Fenna chuckled as I shoved my suitcase in the boot, muttering to myself. Why do you look so glum? You've wanted to go to these council meetings since you were a pup. I thought you'd be excited, she said, folding her arms. I'm not glum. Iadagid. Unable to help but glance over at where Ebbe stood sullenly next to his sister. He hadn't so much as looked at me once since he got out of the basement. Now he'd be staying in my room with Gisli till I got back, and I wanted to march over and tell him he could sleep anywhere else. I was tired of smelling his scent everywhere I went. Fenna's gaze followed mine and my mood soured further when she mused. Ah. I see. You don't see. He's an unpleasant person. She only grinned wider, patting my arm before winking up at Oren, who stood like a bodyguard behind her. He offered me a small smile, but whatever he was going to say was cut short when a shadow fell over me. I swallowed and forced a smile onto my face as I turned to my alpha. Fenna touched my shoulder and whispered by my ear. Remember what I told you. It's not just about being the strongest. And you certainly don't have to charm anyone. You'd be terrible at it. I tried to keep a straight face and reached back to squeeze her hand in thanks. Dad shifted on his feet, watching Fenna and Oren head towards the twins. Keep an eye on your mother for me, he said, before tipping my chin up. And make sure you show these alphas whose daughter you are. Make sure they remember you. Surprise flickered to life and my mouth opened and shut a few times. No warnings for me to behave. Or to make sure I treat alphas with respect. I hadn't expected him to encourage me. I'd be sure to leave a lasting impressions now. To act as any firstborn male, would, even if he hadn't specifically said for me to do as much. I'm sure I can manage that, I said. He chuckled and leaned down to press his cheek to mine. I smiled as I breathed in his scent, only to be surprised again when he quickly hugged me too. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling a sense of relief. Don't get into too much trouble, he teased before urging me to the car. I laughed and grinned, shrugging in a way that told him I couldn't promise that. Sliding into the car, I was still grinning. Excitement fluttered to life in my stomach again. I was going to council. Something very few wolves could say they had done. And fewer females still. This was it. I was getting closer to my dreams now. Mum did her usual overly cautious checks in the mirror before pulling off down the drive. I could have driven us, I said. She hated it. And I quite enjoyed it. But she hated the idea of me driving even more. When she didn't answer, I followed her line of sight. My stomach flipped when I saw the wolf that was running alongside us. The shaggy gray and brown coat and blue eyes giving away that it was the male I'd been cursing out for the last 2 days. I called him something unpleasant under my breath, pointedly looking away. Roadkill, Mum snorted. And I cringed. I hadn't been quiet enough then. What exactly did you two say to each other in the basement? You've been posturing around each other all day. I frowned, looking over at her. I thought you heard us on the cameras. She gave me a slightly scathing look that had my cheeks burning. We saw you were down there, but we didn't listen in. You're an adult, Raeghan. We wouldn't spy on you. I mumbled an apology for jumping to that conclusion. Mum shook her head, a smile playing over her lips, but she kept her eyes trained firmly on the road. She must have known a little of what had happened though. I'd let enough slip. What was the harm in revealing a little more? He went from smiling and happy to calling me spoiled and narrow-minded in a split second. That's what happened, I finally answered, folding my arms across my chest. I don't want to talk about him. Tell me what to expect when we get to Edinburgh. She gave me a quick sidelong glance but didn't question me any more about Ebbe. I listened intently as she told me how the council worked and what might be spoken about, with no incidents being reported of either struggling packs or trouble with humans. She said it would be a quick gathering. I didn't mind that. This was my chance to simply watch and learn. As country roads turned into a busy dual carriageway, conversation stopped. The concentration on my mum's face had me smirking out the window and watching houses and towns pass us by. I turned on the radio after a while and raked through the bag at my feet for the bottle of orange juice I'd packed. Mum sung along to her favorites, even turning it up when the chicks came on. I laughed, glad to see her finally relaxing. Only when we headed into the city did she quiet again, and I turned down the volume for her. I sat up in my seat. I'd been to a few smaller cities but none this big. Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, was a mix of ancient buildings amongst the new. Tourist shops selling knickknacks, CDs, and t-shirts, interspersed with cafes, restaurants, and pubs filled with locals. Mum drove slowly over cobbled streets that rattled my teeth until we pulled to a stop outside one of the higher-end hotels. I quirked a brow at the number of stars the restaurant next to it boasted. Not what you were expecting, she chuckled, peering up at the Georgian-style building. Alpha Joshua insists upon it now that Edinburgh is in his territory. Showing off has always been his forte. Mum, I gasped, unable to believe she'd talk about another alpha that way. With a wink, she slid out of the car and walked around to the boot to grab our suitcases. I felt underdressed in my black skinny jeans, hoodie and off-white Converse, while the humans inside all seemed to shop in high-end fashion shops. Red-soled heels. That meant something expensive, right? Shaking my head, I grabbed my suitcase and followed Mum inside. I didn't care that I was eyed with disdain, disapproving eyes trailing over me. I smirked as I breathed in, noting everyone was human. If only they knew what had just walked in. I looked around a little more while Mum picked up the room key, feeling as if I shouldn't touch anything. Expensive vases held an array of colorful flowers and a massive crystal chandelier hung from the roof. Even the lifts boasted sleek golden doors unmarked by a single smear. Come along, Pup, Mum called, startling me into catching up with her. The female at the reception gave her an odd look. This place is insane, I muttered, following her up the red carpeted stairs. Mum hummed and led me down one of the narrow halls. I'd prefer us to hold council somewhere away from human eyes, but neutral territory. Especially with humans nearby. Puts off fights. We can hardly have wolves roaming the halls and tearing through rooms. I nodded in understanding but wondered what would happen if a fight did break out. It wouldn't be that surprising. Surely. A room full of testosterone-filled males all trying to play. Well. Top dog wasn't the most inoffensive way to put it. Then again. Dad often said that an alpha who couldn't keep a level and cool head wasn't a good leader. The room Mum stepped into was small and more simply decorated. For some reason. I was grateful for that. 2 single beds. A TV on the stand. A bathroom with a toilet and amazingly. A shower crammed into the corner. I tossed my suitcase onto the bed by the window so I could see the comings and goings of the people below. The meeting won't be until tomorrow, but the others will arrive throughout the night if they haven't already. We could go have a meal in the restaurant. I'm sure a few alphas may join us if they see us. Mum suggested. Smiling at me. I'd never eaten anywhere this fancy and I was oddly nervous about it. Of course I'd been out to eat with friends in school. Some of whom were even human. But none of us had had the money to go anywhere more expensive than Frankie and Benny's. I was glad Mum had told me to pack my nicer clothes amongst my jeans and hoodies. Do the other alphas ever bring someone with them? I asked. Sometimes they'll bring an heir with them. Or their mates. Others don't bother to come themselves at all and will send their beta. Unless something urgent happens. Your father normally stays home. He doesn't like the politics. She rolled her eyes and laughed like it was a joke that only she understood. Waving her hand. She sobered up. Get changed and dolled up. Then we'll go have a nice mother-daughter evening. I grinned at her and pulled out the one good dress I owned. Fenna was right. I deserved to have a little fun and I couldn't remember the last time Mum and I had spent time alone together like this, away from the pack where she didn't have to be an alpha female for a while. We laughed and joked as we got ready. And she told me more about the alphas and who she thought might appear, the heirs who often came. I was interested in them. They could become alphas at the same time I did and I'd need their support in that. Maybe I would have to use whatever charm I possessed just a little. I felt less like a sore thumb when we went back downstairs. My floor-length blue dress fit in amongst the females that wore evening gowns too. I'd even managed to tame auburn curls in gentle waves. While Mum let her wild ginger hair sit freely. She didn't look old enough to be my mother by human standards and I wondered what the humans made of us. Sisters, maybe friends. As we were being seated by one of the waiters. I immediately caught onto the sense of other wolvers. Where Mum kept an easy smile on her face. I sat ramrod straight. Defensive instincts urged me to growl a warning but a hand on my leg silenced the building sound. It's just the others. Calm down. She warned quietly. But firmly. I had to get a hold of myself. When I caught sight of the 3 males sat at a table across the room. I settled a little. I recognized Alpha Joshua. And our elder northern neighbor. Alpha Thomas. But the younger male was unknown to me. Mum straightened up a little and bowed her head to which they bowed back. Acknowledging us. I was glad the waiter returned to take our order but I was still aware I was being watched. Try as I might. I couldn't help but glance over at them again. The younger male was the only one still looking. And aqua-green eyes crinkled as he smiled. Who is that? I asked. Snatching my glass of white wine, the moment it was set on the table. I'm not sure. I've never seen him here before. Mum replied. Reaching over to touch my arm. Ignore them. This is our night. Catch me up on everything I've missed. I laughed and took a sip of wine. Shrugging a shoulder. Nothing. I've not exactly been up to much apart from training. Fenna offered for me to go back to Oren's pack with her, but I said no. That got her attention. She stared at me with wide golden eyes, but I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Before I could become worried about her sudden silence, she relaxed and smirked. You and Ebbe would murder each other. Gods. Mum. I groaned, narrowing my eyes. You're obsessed. Her laughter filled the air and she simply shrugged as I had and took a sip of her own wine. I'd have to keep an eye on her. Though a great and strong wolf, my mother couldn't handle much alcohol. Once, I'd heard Quillen tease her for having a lower tolerance than a human. Thankfully, she respected my dislike for talking about a certain male and switched topic. She shared some news of my uncle Everett. A male not even a full year older than myself. I missed him and Grenade a lot, but I would see him tomorrow. And Grenade always came to us for the summer solstice, so I would see her soon too. Our meal came quickly, and I grinned as my steak came into view. Now that conversation had slowed while we ate, I became aware once more of the other alphas. More wolves had arrived and headed straight for their table. That meant more eyes watching. I could practically smell the impatience in the air, and wondered why they were so eager to speak to us now when we had all day tomorrow. I was a little more at ease to see Alpha Zale amongst them. A close friend of the family. He'd been the one by my father's side after the murder of his parents. If only Saba were here too. I'd have another wolf on my side, but I imagined she'd stayed behind to watch the pack and their pups. They're still staring. I grumbled. Of course they are. Mum looked proud as she smiled at me, her chin tilting up. They know who you are. And they're eager to be introduced to you. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but now that we were both stuffed from my meal, I prepared to be thrown to the wolves. Mum put her cutlery down and sighed to herself. That was good, wasn't it? Why don't you go to the bar and get us another round of drinks? I better go play my part as peacekeeper. An innocent suggestion, one might think. But I knew better. She was offering me a stolen moment to compose myself before joining her. Why was I so nervous anyway? I wasn't shy by nature. I was a daughter of alphas. Confident. Strong. And so terrified that they would see me as unworthy. I needed their support to make my claim. This was all about making good impressions. And if I did that, maybe my alpha would see he had nothing to fear from other packs in naming me heir. Another wine, I asked, grabbing my purse and sliding from the chair. My feet ached as I stood, despite having been sitting down. I hated the heels I'd crammed my feet into. At least they gave me a little extra height. One more. She agreed, leaning over to press her cheek to mine and squeeze my arm. You can't reveal what you are in here, but make sure those alphas know. I'll try. Smaller than even me. It was amazing to see how confidently my mother strode over to them. She didn't flinch from their gazes and greeted each of them with a smile. My approach wouldn't be anywhere near as graceful or sophisticated. Heading for the bar, I ordered two more drinks and ran over how I would introduce myself to the alphas. I let out a heavy sigh as my third imaginary run-through went wrong. I was overthinking. I needed to relax. Every human in here looked relaxed, laughing and chattering. I looked over the couples and groups of friends that filled the room. The hair on my arm stood on end as my drinks were placed on the counter, but I didn't acknowledge whoever had come up behind me. I could smell he was a wolf and tried to act naturally as I gulped down a mouthful of vodka and coke. My choice of liquid courage. They're fascinating to watch. Aren't they? The male murmured, turning to face him. I wasn't surprised to see he was the aqua-eyed one who had first watched me. I was just thinking about how different their lives must be. Lacking something in your own life, I snorted in disbelief, my eyebrow flying up. He grinned and held out his hand in an awkwardly human way. Straightening up, I shook it and smiled. I'm Raeghan Ava Lyall, daughter of Oh. I know who you are, daughter of Cathwolf and Rorke. I'm Gordon. Grandson and heir of Alpha Tomas. I've been looking forward to the day I'd meet you. You have, I asked, looking down when he kept my hand in his. Something must have flashed in my eyes because when I grit my teeth, he immediately let go and took a half step back. Are you looking to become peacekeeper after your mother? I laughed at that, unable to even imagine such a position. Oh no. I'm normally the reason my mother has tried and keep the peace. Gordon smirked, his head tipping to the side as his eyes wandered over me. I shifted on my feet, my chin jutting out as he spoke again. I don't doubt that. If you're not here to learn the art of keeping peace between wolves, then I imagine it's about the proposal my grandfather put towards your alpha. Yes. A union between our packs would be monumental. It would strengthen our ties. My veins scorched as anger bubbled up. Had that been why Dad had let me come? So I could parade myself in front of future alphas that might want to claim me as theirs. Strengthens our ties. Or your power and territory, I accused, grabbing my vodka and Mum's wine. With straight shoulders and my head up, I turned away from him. Excuse me, grandson of Tomas. I'm not here to find a mate, and tonight I am spending time with my mother. The sound of Gordon spluttering behind me gave me a small flicker of delight, and by the time I reached Mum again, I almost felt less furious. I couldn't confront her here though. And my dad was lucky he was so far away, or I'd have hunted him down to confront him too. There was no way Mum didn't know about this so-called proposal. It had been kept from me on purpose. Ah. Here she is. Mum beamed as she accepted the glass of wine I held out for her and then turned me to face the alphas. This is my daughter, Raeghan. She's looking forward to being a part of tomorrow's meeting. It's good to see you again, Alpha Joshua said, before motioning to the unfamiliar female clutching his arm. Might I introduce you to Annie?